dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. Headlights on both ends of my day. This country life is for me. Ride with us, HPJ. Ride with us, HPJ.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jennifer Latsky, and I am the Associate Editor of High Plains Journal. And welcome to this third session of High Plains Journal's virtual Alfalfa U. Today's session will feature Steve Norberg of Washington State University with tips on how you can use the hay quality samples that you're already pulling to fine-tune your fertility recommendations. He'll also update us later on in the show on the future of alfalfa breeding and how future quality traits that breeders are selecting for today can help you grow your markets tomorrow. We'll also hear from Ryan Larson of Utah State University, who will share the economic returns of STEAM technology in your fields. And after the break, Dan Undersander, forage agronomist emeritus of the University of Wisconsin, will return to help us control our leaf loss during harvesting. You know, High Plains Journal has been providing these Alfalfa U seminars for 6 years now, and it's just one way that we are investing in you, our neighbors and friends. But we know that the next generation of farmers needs our help as well. And that's why now until April 30th, High Plains Journal will donate 25% of every subscription we sell to a state FFA organization of your choice. Visit hpjsubscribe.com/FFA and help a chapter near you. We know that education for alfalfa growers is vital to your bottom lines, and that's why we've lined up speakers today and in all 4 of our sessions who are going to help you put dollars back into your wallets. So mark your calendars now to return for our last session, March 11th. All of you registered attendees will get reminders and a webinar link via your emails. And if you missed our first 2 sessions, those recordings are up at hpj.com/alfalfau. We also want to invite you to all of our in-person events throughout the rest of the year, and we are so excited to be going back to in-person events. The early bird registration will open up for High Plains Journal's Cattle U March 15th. That early bird registration is just $50 until March 29th for our 2-day event, which will be July 29th and 30th right here in Dodge City, Kansas. After the early bird closes, the registration will be $100. And you can look for details on that at cattleu.net. You know, we couldn't do things like this, whether in person or online, without the tremendous support of our sponsor partners. We want to thank our premier sponsors, Alforex Seeds and John Deere, and our associate sponsors for this session, STAHELIWEST and Harvest Tech. Now, I'm sure many of you have had some experience with the Zoom webinar platform over the last year, but for those of you who may be unfamiliar with how this is going to work, let me let you in on a few notes. First, we've already muted your video and microphones, and we ask that you keep those muted throughout this session. You can ask questions at any time during the sessions. Just click on the chat button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and type your questions in the pop-up box that appears. We'll get to those questions during the question and answer segments after each speaker's presentation. All of our sessions are being recorded, and the recordings are going to be posted as soon as we're done at hpj.com/alfalfau, and you'll get an email reminder with those recordings are posted. And finally, for those of you who are in need of CEU credits, at the end of this session today, we'll have we'll put that slide back up on the screen right there, and you'll be able to click on those codes and send them into your respective organizations. If you have any troubles, please contact Kylie Reese at 620-227-1834. Now, before we get started with our first speaker, Here's a word from our sponsor, Alforex Seeds. And joining us today is Doug Bastian, North America's sales leader for Alforex Seeds. Welcome to the screen, Doug. It's so good to see you again. Are you ready for session 3 of Alfalfa U?
We certainly are. We've certainly been appreciative of being a premier sponsor for the Alfalfa U. They have been very successful in the past, helping those farmers learn and train and hopefully take some information back to their farms that they can utilize. For us at Alforex Seeds, we also are thankful for all that we've been able to do and accomplish, and we look forward to the continued success of this program. I'll take it back to you, Jenny.
Hi, I'm Ron Cornish, General Manager of Alforex Seeds, one of the co-sponsors of Alfalfa U. I'd like to personally welcome you to Alfalfa University this year, and I hope that you'll find the information in Alfalfa University to be useful, informative, and that you'll take it back to your own farm or to your customer's farm so they can be more productive when coming to raising alfalfa. Alforex Seeds prides itself in having over 300 distributors and dealers across the U.S. representing the Alforex and Dairyland Seed brands. Now, we realize that there are a lot of choices when it comes to purchasing alfalfa seed. But we feel at Alforex Seeds, with our focus on alfalfa and other forages, that we break ourselves out of that pack. We also pride ourselves on our variety development process. With our connection back to Corteva Agriscience, our parent company, who is running one of the world's largest alfalfa breeding programs. This provides us an excellent opportunity to test and to research a wide variety of genetics to develop really great products. Alforex Seeds, in combination with the Dairyland Seed brand that we support, we have one of the largest portfolio of products in the market today. But don't take it from me. Why don't we take a little bit of time and listen to some of our very satisfied customers and how our products performed on their farm. Again, welcome to Alfalfa University, and here, let's take a listen to some of our customers.
Justin Pitch stated, our dairy cows love Hygest 660. We green chop everything, and we like that it holds forage quality well after bloom. Plus, we like the fact that we can use lagoon water for irrigation without any effect because of its salt tolerance. It's the best alfalfa we have ever produced and would recommend to all producers looking for a boost in their operation. Eli Bailey stated, once we got the water and fertility right, it seemed genetics was holding our growers back. But as we have moved to varieties like 429, growers are getting more dairy quality hay and upping their yields too. Kist shared, this is my first time planting alfalfa. I chose rugged alfalfa for grazing our cattle, knowing that we had saline issues with the pasture and on average received very little rainfall. We are happy with how it's performing for grazing cattle in the first year with almost no rainfall. Aaron Adams stated, "Stand establishment at 4,400 was the best I've ever had in my years of farming. I was concerned with the hot, dry weather that the stand would not be as good as it turned out, but all in all, I am very pleased with the emergence and regrowth. For first season alfalfa, it yielded and tested very well. 4,400 is everything I hoped it would be so far. I anticipate a very good crop this year and for years to come."
Well, thanks so much for that message, Doug and Alforex Seeds. And later on in this session, we'll hear from our other premier sponsor, John Deere. And remember, you'll be able to find more information about all of our sponsors and the services and products they have to offer in your registration packet and materials that were emailed to you. You can also find more information online at hpj.com/alfalfau. Well, now it's time to get started with our first speaker, Steve Norberg. Steve is an associate professor with Washington State University and serves as Extension Regional Forage Specialist. Steve serves the irrigated portion of the Columbia Basin for forages and is responsible for the Washington State Alfalfa Variety Trials in association with the Washington Hay Growers Association, of which he is an advisor. Steve has worked in University Extension for over 25 years, including working in Missouri, Colorado, Oregon, and now Washington State. You're already pulling hay samples for your quality reports for your customers. Well, today, Steve is going to share how you can use those same samples to tissue test for phosphorus and to help your fertility program, and thus maximize your time and your input costs. Steve, welcome to Alfalfa U. The screen is yours, sir.
Thanks for your time and attention today. Today, again, I'd like to talk to you about using hay quality testing samples to improve your fertilizer recommendations. I'd like to first come off by thanking colleagues that helped me put this research together. Don Llewellyn, Steve Franson, Joe Harrison, Aaron Mackey, and Liz Whitefield. So this is the concept that we're going to take the hay quality sample taken from the bale to monitor the phosphorus and potassium levels like a tissue test. So what would happen is that the farmer would take his typical hay sample and then deliver that to the laboratory and then have the laboratory split after grinding the sample. That way you get a good split and run it in the lab and then ask them to run an ICP test for the phosphorus and potassium level. The NIR may also give you P and K levels, but it will not be quite as accurate as the ICP. And so until you're comfortable that those numbers are very similar, I would probably continue to do the ICP. The tissue tests are thought to be more accurate than soil tests if done properly. But when we started this experiment, we needed more information to know what level and how to make decisions. And so that's what started this work. So, but we looked at both phosphorus and potassium, and we used monoammonium phosphate, otherwise known as MAP, and it put on rates on P2O5 per acre of 0, 30, 60, 120, and 240 pounds per acre. We also, for the potassium experiment, we used potassium sulfate, and we put on 0, 40, 80, 160, 240, and 320 pounds of K2O per acre. The results from the 3 years is what I'm going to share today, and it all occurred on the same stand. And so we took that same stand from year 1 all the way to year 3. The phosphorus and potassium applications were made in early spring at April 18th on 2018, April 11th in 2019, and March 25th in 2020. So, starting to look at the beginning soil test levels when we started this experiment in the plots. And I want you to look particularly at the bottom line where it says what the average of the field was across the different treatments. So we had a soil that was very deficient in phosphorus, as you can see there at the bottom, 8.3 parts per million using the Olsen P method. And here we have the spring soil test for potassium right at 100 parts per million. And so again, these soils are deficient and need application. So we should have seen a response, and we did. So I want to show you a little bit what the different, particularly what phosphorus deficiency looks like out in the field. So if you look at this strip right through here, this is where no phosphorus was put on this soil. And you can see in this area here where the alfalfa looks slow to come back in the spring. This was taken on April 10th. And so this is what phosphorus deficiency could very well look like out in your field. If you look over here where we had the high rate, you see that it's nice full looking alfalfa. And so looking for a leaflet symptom for phosphorus in this experiment did not occur. And so just looking for areas that are slow to regrow in the spring may be an indication of a phosphorus deficiency. So let's look at some of the yield results that we had during the 3 years from 2018 to 2020. So this was a spring planting. And so here we look at the different rates of P2O5 per acre of the monoammonium phosphate. And here we have yield in tons. Okay, so this is a summation of each year. So in the first year, it was a spring planting. So we had cuttings in July, August, and September. And so the summation of those with no fertilizer was 5.7 tons to the acre. Here, if we put on the high rate, we got up as high as 6.6 tons per acre. So 9/10 of a ton of an increase on this particular soil. And you can kind of see that the response was fairly similar all the way up to the high rate. This was the yields from 2018. And so again, 5.7 to 6.6 was the yield increase that we saw. So 9/10 a ton in 2018. Here we see in 2019, which is the yellow line, the subsequent year. And so this was the beginning of the picture that you saw, was the beginning of 2019. So here we started at 8.8 tons to the acre, and we got up to 10.3. Okay. And so again, there's a significant yield increase there to the phosphorus over the 5 cuttings that occurred. And the red line, very similar in 2020, but was the 3rd year, and we went from 8.4 to 10 ton per acre. So when during the season did we see our yield increase due to phosphorus? So in other words, we took the total yield increase that we received over the year, and then we looked at it and said, okay, how much of that increase occurred at each cutting? And so just look at the 120 pound rate, for instance, because I think that'd be similar to what a farmer would do in most situations. So 51% of the yield increase that we saw from the monoammonium phosphate occurred in the first cutting. 16% occurred during the second cutting, 12% on the third cutting, 9% on the fourth cutting, and 13% on the fifth cutting. So what this says is that we've got to have that phosphorus down there early, because this is where we saw our yield increases. It's probably the most important time. Although we need to have it up for all season, this is where you got your biggest bang for your money in fertilizer, was in the first cut. So this slide is really busy, but I'm going to lead you through it. Okay. So here we have our P2O5 rate prior to planting. So here we have the 240 pounds applied, although this is in year 29. So this is the second year of the experiment. Okay. And so this is, and on this side we have yield, which is the red line here. So that's yield. And then for gross income minus fertilizer cost per acre is right here. Okay. And so as the yield went up, so did the returns to that fertilizer on a per acre basis. And you can see that in here we reached a peak, and then we went back down when we put on too much. The fertilizer cost more than the yield result that we got. And so this was at $150 per ton here. is at $200 per ton. So you can see the return was higher, and this is what it looks like. So what we found out in 2019, assuming that monoammonium phosphate, or your MAP, was $560 per ton, which is equivalent to almost 54 cents per pound of P2O5, that when we did this experiment, 150 to 60 pounds of P2O5 per acre maximized gross revenue minus fertilizer costs at $150 and $200 per ton of alfalfa respectively. So what that means is if you had $50 a day, then it was best to put on 150 pounds P2O5 per acre. And if you had $200 ton hay, $160 pounds of P2O5 was the optimum. So this allows us to look and see the value putting on that fertilizer. Now, this is just a little bit of a background slide that I wanted you to be aware of. So when you start dealing with tissue tests, the tissue concentration in the plant changes over time. And so I wanted this slide to kind of show you, and it also makes a difference what part of the plant that you select. And so this work was done by Orloff and Putnam, and it was done in California. And basically they took either the whole tops, which is the blue line, and they did it at different times, either early bud, late bud, or 10% bloom. And they looked at the percent phosphorus in the plant at the same fertilization level, okay? So it declined, the more mature it gets, the more it declines. And this is true whether it's the whole tops, whether it's just the mid stems, or whether it's the top 15 centimeters of the plant. But also it shows you that there's a difference between the plant parts. And so what we're looking at today is the whole tops. And this occurred both years in their experiment. So it's very similar that we know that the concentrations decrease once it gets more mature. So we got to keep that in mind. Now, all the work that I did was at mid-bloom, or mid-bud stage, excuse me. And so for our, in the Western states here, we harvest ours for either export quality or dairy quality hay in the first cutting and to do that, we've got to be kind of in a mid to late bud stage, okay? And so here we look at this and we say, this is basically looking at how the phosphorus concentration changed based on different rates of fertilizer, which are the different colors here, and the cutting. And so again, we have phosphorus concentration here. So if we didn't put on any fertilizer, notice what we see here. Again, early spring is when we needed to have that with the concentration in the plants low. So that's when we got to have that fertilizer on there. It's second cutting, we had our highest phosphorus concentration in the plant, and then it kind of leveled off on the control level. Now, if you look at that at the high rates that we put on, again, we jumped the concentration from 0.2 all the way up to about 0.43, and then it went up to above 0.45, and then it dropped off with the later cuttings. Okay, so this tells you there is some difference, and the high point is going to be at the second cutting, and we really have a lot of need for fertilizer right at the beginning of the season. So what currently in our literature in the western part of the United States, we have a Pacific Northwest guide, and it tells us to look at 0.2 to 0.25% P in the plant at first flower for the whole plant. Remember, this is going to be a little bit lower because we are at first flower instead of mid-bud stage, but still that's the recommendation, the closest I could get to a whole plant mid-bud recommendation. And alfalfa irrigated alfalfa management guide in chapter 6, in the appendix table A, they have a recommendation for whole plants at early and bud stage. So early bud, you'd have 0.28, and bud stage, you'd have 0.26. So I want you to kind of remember this range that we're at here, 0.28 to 0.26, and then kind of look at what our results found. So our results showed that the optimum rate was basically between these two white lines that are vertical here. And as you can see here, we're up here at 0.35 and 0.36 level. So our research showed that we needed to have more phosphorus content than the earlier recommendations that we mentioned here. And again, each line here is a different year. So we did have a little bit difference, but these two were very similar. So we found that the optimum rate was again at 150 and 163 pounds of P2O5 per acre, averaged over the 3 years. So not just the 1 year that we talked about earlier, but this averaged over the whole 3 years. That was the rate, and that coincided with a 0.355 and 0.36% phosphorus in the hay. So this is very valuable information here. That this is what for people in our area that I would recommend them looking at as a phosphorus concentration. And this is again assuming that hay is 150 or $200 per ton of hay. So you can see here it didn't make a lot of difference between these two numbers based on the hay price, but there was a slight difference. So one thing that I found, and I don't want you to get too excited about this because this only happened 1 of the 2 years of the experiment, but I did thought this is a rarity that in the literature that I've been able to find, where did we see an increase in relative feed value, and we're looking at it by cutting. And so this tells us the relative value here. Excuse me, this is an error here, don't look at that. So this is for RFV here. We started at 169 and RFV, and then as we increased the P2O5 in first cutting, we got up to 198, then it dropped down here, and then it took off. And so why we saw this on this particular year, we don't know, but this is first cutting was again where we saw the only fertilizer or RFV response that we've seen in hay. So there's a little swag in the data here. So again, but there is a potential. Don't know that this is going to happen every time, and I would not count on it. But phosphorus can affect the relative feed value of that hay. All the other cuttings really didn't have much of a response except for the 5th cutting again. Not sure why the 1st and the 5th were the ones that responded, but again, those would be the ones that our farmers would typically sell for export or for the dairy farms. But let's just back up. Without looking at relative feed value, the misapplication of phosphorus rate, impact on the economics, and how to adjust the P rate for the next year. So I went back into the hay and I looked at averaged over the 3 years and looked at these different phosphorus contents. If we were low, how much should have put on that year, and maybe need to consider next year to increase that rate. And this is the dollars lost over the 3 years of the experiment. So on a per year basis, you'd want to divide this by 3. But over the 3-year course of the alfalfa, this is how many dollars lost by misapplying the P on a per acre basis based on 150 or $200 ton hay. So as you look at this, again, at 0.36, we didn't lose anything. But if you went to 0.26, look how much you'd be losing, or 0.28 over the 3 years. And so we definitely need to have, and if you were at that level, we needed to put on 120 pounds more. At $200 ton hay, we need to put on 110 pounds per acre P2O5 at this 0.28 phosphorus content. So this will help you maybe to fine tune your fertilizer recommendations for your hay. Now the rate, the amount of P that you need to put on next year may vary depending on how much your soil is able to give the crop. But the losses here, would be also affected by how productive your crop is in the field. So this, remember, produced almost 10 ton hay over the full years, the 2 years that we had there per year. So again, I do think that this is a good place for producers to look at, to start, and help them to fine tune it, but really have this 0.36 in mind as the goal to shoot for. Now, I just wanted to throw in a little bit of information about my soil test levels. Again, the 120 pound rate that we were looking at, we removed over the season, over the 3 years, the 382 pounds. And remember, we put on this per year, so it'd be 360 pounds per acre that we put on, and 382 pounds is what we use. So we actually use more than what we put on. And because we only had a short cutting the first time, we saw the yield increase when we put on that. I mean, the phosphorus in the soil increased in level of parts per million. But when we got into the heavy years, then things started to decline significantly. And so we went from 7.6 to 6.0. And so again, we're still having a decline in this very deficient soil. So let's change our talk now to the potassium study. So we'll go right into the yield. The first year, even at this low testing soil, we did not see a yield increase. Again, remember, we only had 3 cuttings, so we didn't put it under as much stress. But look at 2018 and 2019 and 2020. We went from 9.2 to 10.4, so 1.2 tons per acre increase as we increased it up, and the yield kept going up. And the same in 2020. So, but again, the yield, you've got to make the fertilizer pay. And so we'll talk some more about that, but the yields continued to increase. So when did the yield increase? Again, it'd say 240 pound rate. We increased, 61% of the yield increase was due to the first cut. 27% was due to the second cut. We actually had a loss of 2% during the third cut. And the fourth cut, we had an 8% increase. And the fifth cut, 6% increase. So again, if you look at this, the first 2 cuttings is where you're going to see your large yield response in potassium as well. Now, potassium is a little more tricky than the phosphorus. I wanted to take you through this slide here. This is fertilizer K2O per acre as we go across here. Okay, this is the percent potassium in the plant. Okay, and this was in 2019. And this is first cut data. That's where we got our big yield response. Now look what happened. When we put on fertilizer, our potassium content in the plant actually decreased. And in 2018, for 150 pounds, $550 ton hay, this was actually the optimum. So it really makes it difficult to say, well, what potassium content in the plant should you have used when it's actually lower than when you put nothing on? And so in potassium, this isn't working quite as well. Here you can see the yield increase. And why did this decrease? Because that potassium that the plant took up was diluted with this huge yield increase that you're seeing here. Okay. And as the yield increase kind of stabilized through here, then the potassium content really started shooting up. And then as you got over here and the yield kind of stabilized again, look at the potassium content went up faster. So the dilution on potassium, because it's a higher concentration in the plant, affects the ability to use it as a recommendation. So again, a similar kind of thing through the whole season. You kind of see the same trend. It's just not as severe because the yield increase isn't quite as much when you average it over the whole season. Okay. Now let's look at, again, some of this as we go through. This will tell us somewhat the similar thing. We're going to follow the red line, which is, again, the first cutting. And again, it's low on the first cutting, peaks off at the second cutting, and then dropped at the fourth cutting. So if there was another time that potassium, you might want to think about putting it on, would be right after the third cutting, so that this didn't drop down like this. And then the fifth cutting, it came back up. So again, kind of shows you, it gives you a feel for where it is during the season when the low concentrations are found in the plant. And again, you see here that the zero rate wasn't, as we put on potassium, the only time we got a higher concentration is when we went to the 320 pounds per acre at the second cutting. First cutting, none of them exceeded the control, which is really pretty amazing. So averaged overall cuttings, this is what it looks like. In 2018, we saw that there was just a linear increase in potassium, and we didn't have a yield increase, so it was just very linear. But as we had these huge yield increases in 2018 and 2019, that potassium content actually decreased. over these lower rates. And in 2019, it was able to come up and match up and maintain that. But in 2020, we see here that the soil wasn't able to supply enough of the potassium, and actually it was enough for yield, but it wasn't enough to maintain the content in the plant. If you remember right, the 2020 yield was as good or better than the 2019 yield. So concentration was lower and the yield was equal. So again, it makes it difficult to say where is the optimum level for the plant when some of these lower rates are less than the zero rate. So looking at this in 2019, interesting things happened in 2019. Let's look at relative feed value by cutting as we increase potassium rate. Here you see that the potassium had a little bump here, then it dropped back to about where it was, but then it shot up. So it went actually from 170 to 220 RFV by cutting as we increased all the way to 320. Now again, this did not happen in the second year. So just be aware that this may be a fluke, but, and it's not consistent, we know, but there is a potential there if we're deficient to see this significant bump in RFV. So again, let's look at this RFV, and so we've got relative potassium content in the plant as it increased, and then we've got the potassium fertilizer rate that we put on, and the red line is percent K. So again, we see that decline and then head up, and the relative feed value, look what happened. So it was pretty constant until the content really started shooting up. Once it shot up, then also the RFV shot up. And again, this was on the first cutting a whole plant in 2019. This is the first cutting results. Again, it's not consistent, but we did see this. Okay, so let's look at their soil test level. And this tells, I want producers really to know this. When we're growing alfalfa long-term, how much potassium that we're pulling off. And so this is from 2018 to 2020. And this is, we started the spring soil test at the beginning of the experiment, and then each year in the spring, and then the fall test at the end of the experiment after 3 years, okay? So look at this, even at the 320 pound rate, we started off at 92.8 parts per million, and it kept dropping, 84.8, 78.3, 62. So this number here represents from the beginning to the fall, 33% reduction in parts per million K in that soil, even at the 320 parts rate. That's probably why that field, the potassium content did not increase, because we got all the way down to 62 parts per million at the end of that third year. So this next slide will help you understand why. So again, we have the amounts removed from 2018, 2019, and 2020. And then we've got the first foot, second foot of soil sample, and third foot of soil sample. Look at the 320 pound rate. So what do we put? We put that on for each year. And the first year, when we only had the 3 cuttings, we almost pulled that whole 320 off in 3 cuttings. But look what happened the second year. 616 pounds are pulled off, and what did we only put on? 320. So it's short 300 pounds, isn't it? And then the third year, because the concentration was low in the plant, we only pulled off 250. And apparently that's all the plant could access. And again, the parts per million drop, again, was 31 parts per million in the first foot from the beginning to the end of the experiment. Another 31 parts per million in the first to second foot. And look at that, that alfalfa plant was pulling potassium all the way from the second to third foot. 36 parts per million drop. So we are mining our soils even when we're putting on 320 pounds per acre. And in some years, we're taking off as much as 616 pounds of K2O per acre that we're removing off that 11 ton per acre yield. So in conclusion, 0.36% phosphorus at the mid-bud stage in whole plant samples were optimum in our experiment which is higher than currently recommended. The optimum potassium tissue content, which I have, because especially in the low rates, I don't have a lot of faith in, was 1.9 to 1.5% K. And for $200 ton hay was 2.5 to 1.6% K in that 2019 and 2020 respectively. So to really have confidence in there, I think you need to be in this rate here, 1.6 to 2.5. But in your really low testing soils, from 1.9 to 2.5 range. But again, it doesn't help us a lot to get really precise on it. So I probably recommend your soil test, to continue using your soil test for your potassium recommendations. In 2020, alfalfa K content dropped from 2018 and 2019 levels as the first foot available soil K decreased from 33 to 49% from the spring of 2018 to the fall of 2020. So in other words, we're using a lot of material. This research was funded by the National Alfalfa and Forage Alliance, which is again your checkoff dollars. And this wouldn't have been possible without it. So I really want to thank them and that checkoff program. So with that, I'll open it up for questions if I have time.
Okay, well, thank you so very much, Steve. I think, yes, we do have plenty of time for questions. And folks, remember, you can send us your questions by clicking on the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and typing those there, and we'll get to those here. While we're waiting on those, Steve, I've got a couple for you. We've got folks on from all across the nation. Are some of these recommendations, should they, say if they're in the Midwest or if they're in the Colorado region or however, should they be concerned about these results for their area? Should they start talking to their experts that advise them?
The one that I have the most confidence in is the phosphorus recommendation of 0.36. I think that's something that we need to be looking at, and I think that would be relatively constant across the United States. It would be nice to have further research to confirm that, but the plant, I think, should be somewhat similar, at least in my mind, to the United States. Those rates to put on would be estimates and would probably vary across the United States somewhat, but it would give you a starting point.
Okay.
Again, your potassium, I would continue to use the soil test just because of all the dilution of the K in there. And in this very low testing soil, the tissue testing didn't work very well. Maybe at a tissue testing will do work better at a soil that has higher in K. I don't know that, but in here, it really kind of fell apart.
Okay. We've got a question from the audience. Mr. Wilson asks, is there a different response from dry fertilizer or liquid fertilizer?
Okay. Think of it this way. How much moisture is there in the soil compared to what's in that fertilizer? So as soon as that fertilizer hits the soil, that soil is going to dry out a liquid, and it's going to be basically the same as the dry. Once that, the prill does have to be incorporated, have to have some rainfall or something to break it apart and get it in the soil. But once it's in the soil, there shouldn't be any difference. So unless you're extremely dry and you don't expect any rain or something like that, then there might be a slight advantage to the liquid. But that soil dries it out, so it's virtually the same moisture content once it pretty much hits the soil and gets incorporated.
Okay. Let's talk about weather patterns up your area. You are the alfalfa guy for the West. Give us a little bit of an update, if you will, on how does the area look? What do you expect growers that in your area that they need to start paying attention to as we're going into the spring? And hopefully we have some alfalfa ready to cut.
So our season, we didn't get that really cold snap that everybody else, that the rest of the United States had. I'm in Washington State, in South Central, and serve the Columbia Basin for forages. So I expect that we're going to have a normal year. Everything looks on track. Hay prices look relatively good, and our export levels are up. I don't know, some of you may not out here in the West, we export a lot of hay. And out of the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, half of the hay that gets exported in the United States goes out of those two ports. And so that's important to us. The other half goes out of Long Beach, California. And so our first cut and fifth cut, a lot of it gets exported. And one interesting trivia, out of those two ports of Tacoma and Seattle, the largest number of containers that leave the port are filled with hay.
Wow. So that's it amazes me that that we have so many markets for our hay. It's actually heartening because you think about all the livestock overseas that are you know, dining on our tremendous hay that we've got going out there. Remember, folks, we're taking your questions over on the chat. We have another one. You said you saw an increase in the first cutting. Was the fertilizer applied in the fall or spring?
The fertilizer was applied in the spring, right around late April, early April or late March. So it was in the spring.
Okay. We've got another one. With increased RFV values observed, was wet chemistry used to analyze that?
For the RFVs, it was actually NIR we used for the relative feed value.
Okay. Let's see here. We've got another one from Monty. How would you use a soil sample analysis to base what fertilizer to apply before tissue sampling?
Well, again, this tissue sampling and the stuff that I recommend here is in conjunction with your soil test. This is not going to eliminate your soil test, but it will maybe help you to refine the phosphorus level in your plant. So we feel that the tissue test is probably more accurate if you've got a good critical level there to ascertain than the soil test. But this doesn't mean that you eliminate the soil test. And obviously, you're going to need a soil test for the beginning of the season and beginning before planting. And it's because you're not going to have any hay to test. So you've got to start with a soil test. And again, this will just be used as another tool to refine your fertilizing and possibly even reduce a few soil samples if P is the one that you're really looking at.
Okay. So this may be a very basic question, but for some of our audience, it may be a good refresher. But how would you recommend on your testing the sample collection? Is there any tips or tricks that you want to tell people as far as the tissue testing or the soil sampling? Anything that you can help them out with to make sure that they have the best representation possible before it gets judged?
Okay. So in soil sampling, again, your soil is very variable as you go across the field. So first thing that you want to think about is how often am I willing to change my fertilizer recommendation? Okay. If, assuming that you're not doing variable rate, but that you're doing just one application over an area, how often are you willing to change that rate? And so that's an area that you kind of define an area. You probably don't want that larger than 160 acres. But within that, then you've kind of limited, okay, the area that I'm interested in, that I'm willing to change the soil fertility recommendation. Then I go in there and I got to take at least 13 subsamples, okay? And you want to take a soil probe and you want to go down to the level that your soil recommendations are based off of. If they're based off, most of them are based off a foot, or some of them are based off an 8 inches level. Try to find out what level that they want you to, the recommendations are based off of, and then sample to that depth. Don't put it in a metal bucket, but put it in a plastic bucket. A metal bucket, we used to have a lot of those, but those could possibly give off zinc and to change your zinc recommendations. So you don't want to do that. And stir that soil up really good and submit that pint. And usually most of them will have a little bag for you to fill out and submit your samples in. So stir that up really good because you've got to have a good representation of that. And so that's the basics on a fertilizer or a soil test. Now on the hay test, to get a good hay test, you even got to have even more samples than the soil sample. You need to have about 20 samples pulled off of your haystack with a probe that is going to do a good job. You want a probe that's going to give you the same percent leaves and stems, so that comes out evenly. And just so the same recommendations that you would have for your hay testing would also, if you're going to use that sample for fertility as well, you would just follow that same recommendations. If you forget what I'm telling you, there's a National Forage Testing Association that basically has recommendations online that you can, and also has a listed of those labs that have been certified to the National Hay Testing Association. So that's a good way to find a lab, and for hay testing, your NIR is fine. I'd like for you to do a few ICPs before, so that you make sure you're comfortable that you're getting similar recommendations between the NIR and the hay test before you rely on the NIR for your phosphorus levels.
Okay. See, I always think it's good to get back to those, because there's always somebody in the crowd that won't raise their hand. We've got some more questions from the chat. From Dan Funky. Can you comment on the availability of nutrients found in commercial fertilizer compared to the same nutrients found in composted livestock manure? And that's a good question, because we've got a lot of folks that are using composted livestock manure.
Okay, so we're fortunate in the United States that under regulations they have to test and certify that the NPK levels or other levels of fertilizer are the right amounts. And so that's fortunate. So you want to use your NPK that's listed on the fertilizer as that. Now, as far as the other compost and manure and stuff, it's even a little more challenging, because that can be variable as well. But you want to get as good a samples as you can and have those analyzed as well. And once those are analyzed, then use those values in place where you use your traditional fertilizer values. So again, finding a laboratory, taking a good sample, and what animal it's from changes the concentration that the manure is, how it's composted, all these things have an effect. And so, the other thing to remember is that if you use manure and compost, you can add inorganic fertilizer with that, as long as you're not organic. And so some people in our area have learned that, and they'll put a base down of compost or manure and then come back with other nutrients that it's lacking.
Okay. Looks like we've got another one here. Is there an advantage to foliar feeding your fertilizer throughout the growing season?
Well, again, foliar feeding is a challenge, because you can only get so much through the plant. So for phosphorus and potassium, it's not going to be able to absorb the quantities needed to go for all of that. So in general, I would probably spend my time on again, pricing my fertilizer based on the pounds per acre and the cost per acre for each, basically the dollars per pound of P2O5 and dollars per pound of K2O, or whatever element that you're putting on. Price your fertilizer based on that, and then make your decisions based on that.
Okay. It looks like later on you're going to be speaking to us about the genetics, using genetics in alfalfa, and some of the great work that we're seeing coming out of the breeding programs. Is there any work in the pipeline that you know of where we may have some alfalfa of the future that has more nutrient usage capability, or is more efficient with its use of phosphorus and potassium? Anything along those lines that you want to tease for later on this morning?
Well, I'll just tease you that there's an encouragement there that we can still have room for improvement in hay quality. Okay, there's less work done on nutrient efficiency, but on hay quality, and that's what we're going to talk about, there's definitely room for improvement. So we'll share about how much. And an interesting thing, we've kind of looked at alfalfa from all over the world and tested it. So it'll be interesting. It'll be kind of a different kind of a talk, but I encourage you to kind of come and listen to it.
All right. Well, it looks like that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so very much for joining us this morning, Steve, and we'll see you later on this morning, afternoon in the Central Time, closer to lunch for the folks out west. Thanks again, Steve. We'll see you later.
Thank you.
All righty, folks. While we get our next speaker lined up, we want to take a brief moment to recognize some of our sponsors for today's session. And here's a word from our sponsor, John Deere.
Now you can get more from your mower conditioner with John Deere 0 Series mower conditioners. Cover up to 10% more acres per hour with the wider cutting width of the C500. This lets you hit tight harvest windows and increase your productivity. The John Deere 0 Series mower conditioners feature side pull and center pivot models with a wide range of cutting widths to meet your needs. Mow with a wider range of tractors and handle hills easier. Use less horsepower and fuel thanks to the lighter weight of the redesigned C400. Customize your windrows to improve dry down thanks to wider conditioning rolls. Width of the windrow is critical to dry down, and the C400 lets you put down windrows of up to 133 inches wide. Many John Deere 0 Series models give you the ability for wider windrows thanks to the forming vanes. This lets you preserve hay quality while giving you more time to bale before Mother Nature strikes. In addition to quicker dry down times, you'll speed up knife replacement. With quick change knives, you can cut time changing knives in half. With the simple tool, you're able to change your knives out in minutes and return to cutting, helping you maintain the best cut quality. You'll also get more choice when it comes to conditioning your crop. The wide variety of models in the 0 Series let you match the conditioning options to best fit your crop and operation. For grasses and grass legume mixes, our economic impeller options fit the bill. The urethane roll is excellent for thicker stem grasses, cane, or legume crops. Two steel intermeshing options, the V10 and the Trilobe, offer durability with improved crop conditioning. John Deere is confident in the durability of its mower conditioners. To ensure you share this confidence, we've upped our warranty. Now, both parts and labor are covered for all components on the proven low-profile cutter bar for 5 years on all John Deere mower conditioners. Get more productivity, tractor compatibility, uptime, choices, and confidence with John Deere 0 Series mower conditioners.
And now we have another word from another one of our sponsors, STAHELIWEST.
My name is Don Roberts. I'm a local farmer here in the Parowan Valley with many good farmers around me. The challenge without the steamer is the weather and the elements controlled you. You couldn't sleep when you wanted to sleep. It told you when you had to work or not work. And if you were sick or something happened or there was some problem, you couldn't catch up. You would just have to bale bad hay. And there's many times you'd just close your eyes and bale a lot of bad hay. So it wasn't a hard sell for Dave to try to sell us to try to buy the steamer when he come up with it, because we had all the problems in our head, we had all of the challenges. It was an instantaneous sign me up. I remember the first time we got on the field, it had rained and it had set us back. And I have a farm that's 600 acres over by the mountains, and it had rained and it set us back, and the rain was going to come again in a couple of days, and it had just got to where it was perfect. And I thought, man, I hope I can get it. And I baled 24 hours straight with one baler, one steamer, and I did 600 acres and baled the whole farm and got it before the next rainstorm hit. And I remember, man, you couldn't have ever done that. And the value was, it made poor hay into medium grade hay to low end good hay. And I thought, wow, this just saved a whole bunch of tromping over the next crop because I got the next rainstorm. It just saved me so much money. It works. And not only does it works perfectly. It's not expensive. You can't afford not to have it.
Well, thank you, John Deere, and thanks also to our associate sponsors for today's session, STAHELIWEST and Harvest Tech. And now let's learn about the economic returns of STEAM technology with Dr. Ryan Larson. Dr. Ryan Larson is an associate professor and extension economist in the Department of Applied Economics at Utah State University. He specializes in farm and risk management, and he teaches courses in agricultural finance, risk management, and decision analysis. Dr. Larson, welcome to Alfalfa U. Take it away, sir. We're all excited to hear about this research that you've got for us today.
Okay, well, I don't know if I agree that everyone's excited to listen to The Economist. I'm a realist, and I know that sometimes we're a little tough to listen to, but I'm excited to talk about this research that was conducted and some of the results. After watching that STAHELIWEST video, maybe we should just rewatch that again, and I'll cut my presentation short. But you know, there's a lot of fun technology that is impacting alfalfa, and so I'm going to talk about this artificial steam technology today, artificial rehumidification, if you want, and talk about that and how that applies to the financial impacts, how that applies to your operation. So when we look at what I want to talk about today, I want to talk about the overall topic are this artificial steam, artificial humidity, but I want to talk about how you make a decision, how you decide whether to invest in technology on your farm, how you analyze it, how you should look at that. So I want to talk about that decision-making framework, key decision drivers. As you look at that decision, I'm going to look at a few different techniques to analyze it and how we can understand those. Then I'm going to apply those to these alternative steaming technologies and look at some of the key takeaways here. As you look at that picture on the left, no, I'm not going to be talking about Fendt tractors today. You know, I saw John Deere's sponsorship, so hopefully they'll forgive me for this picture. But this is a picture of the trial that we did. So I want to talk about that. I'll show a video here in just a second. But when we talk about these type of technologies, I've done a lot of work with UAVs, drone technology, genetic technology. And so whenever I, as an economist, look at this type of technology, I classify them as risk reducing technologies. Now, I think that's a key designation when you look at these. And what I mean by risk reducing technologies, when we were working with, and we still are with UAVs and drones, we look at how those UAVs can provide information to help us make better decisions on fertilizer, pest control, whatever that may be. But in the end, what that information is doing is helping us make better decisions to reduce our risk. Now, when I analyze these technologies, whether it's the Dew simulator or the STAHELIWEST steamer, whatever that may be, I view them as risk reducing technology. When we look on that quality risk side, right, being able to bale in a timely manner, just like the video said before that rain came in, right, that change in quality improved and was able to reduce that quality risk, and it coincided with the change in your price risk. As we know that alfalfa is very sensitive pricing wise to quality changes. So by controlling quality, you're also able to control your price risk a little better. I'm going to be talking about yield risk. Yield/production risk, which is just being able to maintain the stems and leaves and improving the quality and yield that you are able to bale. Then finally, I want to think about what I call this baling window and this timing risk. Now, I grew up in southern Idaho on a alfalfa, potato, small grains operation. And so when I think of windows of opportunity, I often think about potato harvest. So we always got out of school for potato harvest for 2 weeks, and we were supposed to finish harvesting our potatoes in this 2-week window. But on Larson farms in southern Idaho, that was often a difficult task. Our machinery always broke down, weather, whatever, and we never could finish within those two weeks. And once we got past a certain point in October, my grandfather used to always say, you get past October 13th and you're really rolling the dice on what weather is going to do. And so this baling window, I think in alfalfa production, is a key factor. right? And I'm going to show that baling window and the risk associated with that baling window depends on your location. So this decision that I'm talking about incorporating these, either the Dew simulator, the STAHELIWEST steamer, whatever, it depends. How that decision is made is really going to depend on your specific location and operation. So keep that in mind as I go through this presentation. So the techniques I'm gonna use, in my opinion, the foundational technique is this partial budgeting. And it's simple, straightforward, but provides a lot of useful information. So I'm going to talk about partial budgeting, payback period. That's a common one that we use a lot in agriculture, is how long does it take to pay it back? Capital budgeting, return on investment, and finally, I want to introduce this idea of real options. So this is something just to make you think a little bit as we go forward. So let me see if so this was the trial that Dr. Earl Creech conducted. So I'm not an agronomist. I'm not a plant scientist. So I take those numbers. So the data was collected from a farm in Milford, Utah, and so the different methods of collection were with steam or with the DewTech, HarvestTech Dew simulator, or with none of that. So we kind of have three cases there, three different trials there that we used, that Dr. Earl Creech used to gather this data. So let's talk about this area. So I'm gonna use this description to kind of help you think about your own areas. So you can see we're near Milford. It averages just over 10 inches of rain per year. High summer temps, low humidity, it's windy. There's high drying rates, low moisture hay. So really what that means, and we saw that in that video before, the Parowan Valley is just across. You can see, so Parowan, where that video was before, was just right there. So you can see it's just over the hill there. So a lot of the same type of difficult conditions. When you look at Milford from the satellite, you can see that it is desolate country. As you drive to Milford, you wonder where you're headed, but there's a pocket of great of both irrigation and good soil that's conducive to alfalfa production. So when you're thinking about your specific area, there's some key things that you want to think about. So this is just gathered from, there's a weather station right in Milford, so an ag weather station that the Utah State Climate Center, they keep track of that data. And so this is the average relative humidity for May, June, July, August. So this goes from midnight till 11:59 p.m. And you can see the trend in that relative humidity. When that STAHELIWEST video was talking about, you baled when it was when you could, right? So the most inopportune times is probably the only time. So you can think about that relative humidity range. Let me, and I'll talk about that window here in just a second. To exacerbate that issue of low relative humidity, this area, like it's windy. So this is the average wind speeds associated. So there's always some type of wind that's blowing across that valley right there near Milford. So the wind exacerbates already dry low humidity conditions. So this is just based on some research I found on looking at where should that relative humidity be. So between that 50 and 70% relative humidity is just a starting point. So don't quote me on that, but so I'm just using this as an example of where that harvest window should be. So that relative humidity between 50 and 70%. So you can see that, so this is the blue line right here, the blue line, and then that orange line is the max. So we're kind of, if we took an average between there, you can see that we get into that range about that 1 o'clock, right? And then we leave that range about 8. So best case scenario, that's our baling window. So we can use that to look at that baling window. And that's, remember this, so this is the month of July. So this is just looking at July. I had to try to separate out those. So so there's our baling window. If we look at that min, right, that min, basically that 3 to, so you have a very small baling window. So the size of that baling window is really going to either decrease or increase the risk associated with production, with alfalfa production on your farm. Now let me show you an example. So this is, I took Utah State University is located in the northern part of the state. So here in Logan, so there's near Cornish, there's some alfalfa production just north of here, right, almost on the Idaho border. There's a weather station sitting right there. So I gathered that to compare this relative humidity from Milford to Cache County. So you can see, right, you can see in blue is our Milford. So if I just drew that line, you can kind of see that trend. And then Cache County has a little different trend. Now, when we look at that from a baling window perspective, so here's Cache County. So this is Cache County here, and then Milford on the left. So once again, here's that baling window, right? So we can put that between here and here. There's our baling window. Now in Cache County, right? So you could almost see that midnight till 10 a.m., right? That's pretty, so there's almost a 6-hour difference in that baling window in these two different areas. Now, when you're making this decision, this is a key consideration that you need to think about is how much time, what's the risk of that time, and what am I willing to pay to reduce some of that risk? Now, let's jump into this. So when we think about that those are some of the key drivers that kind of give us a background for where we're headed. So this is a decision framework that I like to use, whether it's in class, in extension presentations, one-on-one. But this is just a simple framework that helps us kind of put into play and gets us to this partial budgeting framework. The first step is to identify and define that problem. Now, for most of us in the West, that problem is we don't want to bale dry alfalfa. So we need to, or we don't want to just bale all night long or whatever that may be. So that's our problem. We can identify solutions. This steaming technology is one of those solutions. So we're going to collect data and information. So I'm going to provide you with some data information today. We're going to analyze that. That's where that partial budgeting comes into play. So partial budgeting is going to help us analyze these alternatives and help us get to a decision, implement that decision, and then we can evaluate those results. And I'm going to evaluate those results on a financial framework. So think about this all from a managerial standpoint. How would you apply this to your own individual operation? So partial budgeting framework, as I said, it's a very simple but powerful tool. We really look at 4 different categories. Now, first off, when you're using partial budget, you have to understand that we're not going to analyze everything. There's some things that are going to remain constant. We want to just say what is being changed and what are the results of that being changed. So in this case, we're going to look at revenue generated by adopting the alternative. So just that change in revenue because of that. In addition, there could be additional costs from adopting this change. And so we're going to look at the revenue generated minus the cost of adoption. Now on the other side, on that right side over here, that's our other category. So we could also lose revenue by adopting the alternative, but we also could save costs associated with that. So what we want to do is look at this, right, we're going to have that minus that, and then that plus those cost savings. And we want to look at those net benefits. Those net benefits are going to be the key to partial budgeting. So what we'd want to say is then if those benefits are greater than the costs, then we would say that from a partial budgeting framework that the net financial benefits outweigh the costs. And that's the key where we want to get to. So now we're going to take that partial budgeting framework and we're going to apply it to these two different technologies, the steaming technology and the Dew simulator technology. Now, when we look at that, what we want to do is we're going to look at this added income or added revenue. So the added revenue is going to be driven by the increased bale weights from incorporating this technology. Now, based on the research that was done, the steamer had an additional 258 pounds per acre, and the Dew simulator had a 217 pounds per acre. So that's on a per acre basis. So to get to that, what we'll do to look at that change, we're just going to look at that additional pounds per acre times by our hay price to get to our change in revenue. Just simply looking at the change. But on the other side, we have some added costs. There's some costs with that steamer. We're going to look at the annual ownership cost plus our operating costs, and then the same with the Dew simulator. That's going to be the two key components. So we'll take this side minus this side to get to our net benefits. Annual ownership cost is simply going to be, I'll get to annual ownership cost. Let me talk about this. So we had to make a few assumptions. So here's the key assumptions on the right. We're going to assume that the 1,000 acres per baler. 4 cuttings per year. We're going to assume 250-gallon fuel cost. As I drove to work today, I need to update that, and I have a fear we're going to need to keep updating that and increasing that cost. And then I use $200 a ton alfalfa price. Now, of course, as we know, that price could change for both fuel and alfalfa, but this is just simply our starting point. This is our baseline that where we'll begin with. Now, with partial budgeting, you have to assume that some things don't change. My operating cost to bale per acre is $9.76. That's going to remain fixed no matter if I'm using the Dew simulator or the steamer. My operating cost to steam per acre is at $3.50. My Dew simulator, DS stands for Dew simulator, operating cost per acre is $2.21 an acre. And both of those are driven by the fuel used. With the Dew simulator, it requires an extra tractor. And so we're going to have the labor and the operating costs associated with that extra tractor. I assumed a 100 horsepower tractor to pull that Dew simulator. So that's incorporated in that $2.21 per acre. And then of course, what was fixed were the additional pounds per acre for both the steamer and the Dew simulator. One thing I was not able to quantify there on that operating cost, I'm assuming it's only fuel for the steamer and not additional tractor fuel. So as you're implementing this, you'd need to think, well, is my tractor, my baler tractor, as it pulls that steamer, is it going to require a little extra fuel? Something to think about as you go through this. Now, let's talk about annualized cost. So annual ownership cost, I use this what we call the capital recovery method. And the capital recovery method utilizes the purchase price, salvage value, useful life, and a discount rate. So that discount rate simply is accounting for that time value of money or the opportunity cost of capital because we're owning that piece of equipment over multiple periods. So it's simply accounting for that time value of money over that time period. So of course, as we look at this, the annualized cost, the steamer has a higher annualized cost than the Dew simulator just because of the initial starting point of price. So annualized cost is the first piece. Operating cost is that estimated by using fuel, labor, and repair costs on an annualized basis. So when you look at operating costs, the operating cost is going to be a little different for both of these. Now you're starting to see that there's different costs associated with these. So in your mind, you have to start to think, okay, there may be a scenario where one is better than the other. So keep that in mind, because as we see this, the operating cost based on my baseline assumption, $12,600 per year for the steamer, and then the Dew simulator was at just over $7,000 a year operating cost. So those are from a partial budgeting framework. Those are the additional costs associated with implementing this technology. Now, benefits. So with that steamer, so now we want to get this on a per acre basis. So we're going to take that additional pounds per acre and times by that hay price. So the steamer benefits were at that 25.78 just because you get more yield, and then 21.7 for the dew simulator. So those are our benefits on a per acre basis. Now, I should have converted those costs were on an annual basis. And so I will convert those on a per acre basis to get to our net benefits. So now when we look at those net benefits per acre, so based on our assumption, remember this is our baseline, just on that certain scenario, that net benefits per acre for that steamer is right around $12 an acre. And for that dew simulator, it's at $16.28. Now think about what's driving that, right? So that's going to be your annualized cost plus your operating cost is going to be driving a lot of that for that 1,000 acres. So even under both scenarios, so what you can say for certain is that under either scenario, given our baseline assumptions, there's a positive net benefit associated with either technology. So that's the good news when you're looking at that. One key thing to think about as you look at these net benefits also is from a financial risk standpoint, there may be debt associated with taking on either one of these technologies. And so there's going to be the risk of additional debt. And so that's something that you need to discuss with your lender and understand from your own financial situation, whether this is a good idea or not. Now, interestingly enough, so what this chart is showing is this is net financial benefit based on the number of acres. So we know that the steamer has a higher initial cost. And so that annualized cost of that steamer is a little higher. And same as that operating cost, it costs a little more to run that. So what's interesting is that with that, there's this point right here where you'd almost what we'd call indifferent, right? Indifferent between the steamer or the dew simulator. But then that based on the number of acres, the steamer becomes more, has a higher net financial benefit than the dew simulator. So acres is a key piece here. When you're analyzing this for your own operation, the size of your operation is going to be a key decision for you as you look at that. So remember, we talked about geography, understanding your location, the weather patterns, relative humidity, that baling window, right? Baling window is a key driver. Size of operation is another key driver when you're looking at these different technologies. Size is going to play a big role. So understand the importance of size as that size gets bigger, because think about it from that annualized cost. As I am able to bale more, as that number of acres grows larger, I'm spreading that annualized cost over more acres. So it just logically, it makes sense that you're spreading that fixed cost over more acres. As I reduce the number of acres, I'm spreading that fixed cost over less acres, and it's going to cost me more. The dew simulator costs less upfront, and so you're able to spread that cost, right? And it's representative here that net benefit is as you can spread that over less acres, and it keeps that cost lower. So it takes more acres to spread those fixed costs across those different acres, different size of operations. Now, when we look at this just takes that graph and breaks it down into, when you increase that, right as we get past that point, we take that to roughly $22 net benefits for that steamer, just over 21. So $1 an acre difference. So I'm not talking call home to your mom type difference, but it's still $1 difference as you're able to spread those costs over those different over different acres. So understand the importance of looking at those acres. When we look at payback, so this is two different payback scenarios. In blue, that's $200 a ton for alfalfa, $220 a ton. So with payback, so payback for the steamer is just over 4.3 years. And then for that dew simulator, we're right at almost just 1.5 years. Now, if that price of that hay goes up, right, you're just over, basically lose a year, and then, right, that do simulator is basically 1.3. So payback period, right, going back to that initial cost, right, up front, of course, that steamer is going to take a little longer to pay back than that do simulator. Now, of course, I could have taken this to $1.80 a ton, right? And that's just going to increase that payback period for both of these scenarios. Payback's a difficult one. As an economist, I'm not a big, payback tells me very little. Payback is not great as it's simply, right, that's how long it takes for me to pay back the initial investment, but there's a lot that it leaves. It doesn't tell the whole story. So then I want to talk about this. So real options are used heavily in the finance industry, and real options are simply a way to measure the value of managerial flexibility. Now, many of you are probably familiar with financial options, as you're putting marketing strategies together for some of your other crops. You may use puts and calls to manage the risk and put them into your marketing strategies. Financial options, right? They provide an opportunity to exercise that option, but there's a price that you have to pay to purchase that option. When we look at this real options from a managerial standpoint, right, it's the ability to exercise that investment. So when we think about this from this type of technology, it's your ability to turn or turn off those, either the steam or the dew simulator technology. What's the value? If there's good dew, if there's good natural dew, right, turn it off, right? You don't have to spend that money to operate the steamer or the dew simulator. Conversely, right, if you need to bail all day, you have the option to turn that on. So from a managerial standpoint, technology, this type of technology provides flexibility that you would not have otherwise. And so when we think of the cost associated with investing in this technology, right, I go back to what the farmer said in that STAHELIWEST video. He says, there's no cost associated with it. Well, there's always a cost, but what I think he's saying is that the value of that flexibility that steamer allows him by far outweighs the cost associated with that piece of equipment. And from my standpoint, I think what he's trying to say is that flexibility that he has, he values that flexibility to bail all day long, 24 hours straight if he needs to, not bailing all night long, whatever that may be. He or she, the farmer, can put a value to that, and that really is an option value associated with that technology. So when you think about these technologies, think about it from this option standpoint, right? The standpoint that it gives you that flexibility that you would not have otherwise associated with this technology. Right. So when I think about the driving that value of that this artificial dew, the steam or the dew simulator, right? The key points that I think that you need to think about and discuss as an operation is that bailing window, right? What is your local climate? What are the dew points? And what is the percent usage time associated with that, right? What if you only operated the steamer or that dew simulator 50% of the time, right? What would that do to your analysis of that investment? So that length of bailing window is one of the key drivers, right, to understanding the value of this type of option associated with technology. The next one that I think you have to think about is labor availability. What is the value of reducing labor, or what's the value of adding? So labor availability in agriculture is a difficult one, right? We know it's very rare that you find a farmer that has plenty of good qualified labor. So that labor availability, if you have extra labor, if you don't have extra, that's going to really drive that value associated with this technology. Now, I thought it was very interesting talking about exports of alfalfa, right, going out of the Tacoma or Seattle ports, right? I think your terminal market is going to drive this as well, right? If you are in a highly sensitive, high quality type market, if you are driving that export market and you need to produce this type of alfalfa, that's going to increase the value you place on this technology. If you are not sensitive to that quality as much, if your terminal market is not the export market or dairies or whatever that may be that are willing to pay that extra price, you need to analyze and understand, well, maybe the value of this technology is different for me. So that terminal market, I think, is going to play a key role in the decision-making process associated with incorporating this type of technology. Because if you're not getting that premium in quality, if you're not getting an extra price bump, and that was a key piece as I looked at my analysis, right? It's difficult to find hard and fast evidence of that premium for the export market alfalfa, but we all know anecdotally, we've visited with people, we know that premium exists, but how do you quantify that? So as I'm analyzing this, one key piece to add to it would be that premium price, right? If I could get $10, $15, $20 extra a ton, right? That changes my decision-making criteria. So think about that as you think about your terminal market, you think about your buyers, how sensitive they are to quality. All of those key pieces need to be discussed and understood as you think about this technology. And finally, we talked about it, the size of your operation. I think the size of operation is a key driver. Are you 250 acres? Are you 2,000 acres, right? That size of operation, each one of these pieces of equipment have different strengths and weaknesses that fit on different types of operations. So think of about that size and type of operation associated with with your operation, and that's going to be a key driver. So real options, right? Real options, valuing managerial flexibility. And I think in agriculture, the more flexible and adaptable we can be, the more value, more profitable we can be. So think about a different way of thinking, but a way to view this type of technology. So as we think about this, the key takeaways, right? This is really a balancing act, right? There's no one size fits all. These are both great technologies. I love technology in agriculture. I love to see changes, right? If you would have told me 30 years ago, as I moved pipe on our alfalfa fields in southern Idaho, that this is where alfalfa would be today, I would have laughed at you, right? I never thought that technology, this type of technology, would come into alfalfa, but it's here, and it really changes the way we view how to make a alfalfa operation more profitable. So as you think about that, the right answer really depends on your situation. Hopefully you can use partial budgeting. Hopefully you can understand your specific climate situations, relative humidity, whatever that may be, associated with your area, with your geography, to help you make that decision. And understand your terminal market, right? All of those are key pieces as you're making this decision to invest in this type of technology. The key takeaway here is, I think either technology has the potential positive financial impacts. So that's as I analyze this data, right? Either one, right? Either one has positive net financial benefits that are going to vary on size and type of operation. So with that, if you ever have questions about this study, about this presentation, you can always email me here. This is I can be contacted at this email anytime. So with that, Jenny, I haven't been monitoring the chat.
That's okay. That's what they pay me the moderately scientific for. So thanks so much, Dr. Larson, for that presentation. Folks, if you've got questions, be sure to click on the chat button and type those in the box that appears. And it looks like we've got quite a few that are coming in. First off, let's see. You might not be able to answer this quite exactly, and I believe we've got some folks from Staley that are on the line as well. But for this question, we've with the added weight of the steamer, did you guys see any yield reduction from the increased soil compaction, and did that have any part to play in your economic analysis?
Soil compaction is one that that we didn't address, but I think it's a legitimate question. Yeah, we didn't address soil compaction. We tested, Dr. Creech tested the bells and whatnot, but we did not test compaction. I know that's consideration. I'm wondering if someone from STAHELIWEST is on that if you want, but we didn't test compaction.
Okay. While we get it figured out so that we can get Spencer from STAHELIWEST to come on the screen, I've got a few other questions for you. Marketing this hay. If I'm using this new technology and I'm trying to make sure that I get the most market value for it as possible, you might have addressed that a little bit, but are there some, I guess you'd say, is there added value that somebody can capture if they're selling this? When they're pricing their hay, what should they think about?
Yeah, I think that's a key consideration because so what's interesting is visually, you could see a difference in that hay, right? It just looked, and I think for certain markets that visual inspection is a key. And so if you really are trying to capture that premium, and we know there's a premium both for the export market and that dairy quality, you don't want to lose that quality if you have that. So being able to, one, do you have the market in place where are you near buyers that are going to come get your hay, right? If I'm in the back country of Idaho and I'm never going to get my hay to the export market, it's not an issue. But right in Milford and in Washington and some of these places, right, where a lot of that hay is shipped to the West Coast, getting that and preparing that and putting it together in the most pretty package, right? I'll call it a package. That bale is a package, right? That's the way you maximize the value associated with that alfalfa is really getting it prepared and ready for that type of market.
Okay.
Hey, Jenny, I'm available now. I actually had to join on my phone. I couldn't get my camera to work on my webcam. So Spencer from STAHELIWEST is available. Sorry.
Hi, Spencer. Okay, so we've got Ryan on the screen right now, and there's Spencer Douglas from STAHELIWEST. Hi there, sir. Welcome to the screen. We had a few questions come in on the chat about some specifics of the technology that we thought you might be able to answer. Ryan, we're going to keep you there. Don't go away.
I'm not
one of those questions we had was, is the increase in bale weight for moisture or leaf retention? Doug?
It's leaf retention, as we've experienced it, both from the University of Wisconsin study that was done years ago, and then just customer feedback, our own experimenting that we've done. There is the moisture that is added, I would argue, is kind of negligible to the weight. We feel that we're adding anywhere from 5 to 7 gallons of water in the form of steam to a ton of hay. So we didn't measure this by the bale, we measured this by the ton. So in any given ton of 1 ton of hay, there could be as much as 5 to 7 gallons of water in the form of steam that has been introduced and injected into that hay. So when you look at the weight increase, the most we're talking about here is 35 to 40 pounds of actual water weight from the steam that's been injected into the hay. So when we're seeing 100, 150 pounds per bale increase, it really is due to the leaf retention and the conformation of the bale, the density that's created because of the steam.
Okay. We've got another one for you, Ryan. You talked a little bit about the labor costs associated with this, but what are some other things that our alfalfa growers need to be paying attention to as far as labor availability and looking at the whole operation, as it were? What are your key things for them when they're thinking about that?
In this standpoint, the reason why labor is because with these different technologies, the steamer is just right. It's already on you put it on your baler tractor, right? So you don't add an operator. The do simulator, you have to add an operator. And so one of the key considerations is can you find an operator, right? That's, to me, that's a key consideration. Not that this is, I think it's one of those pieces of equipment that you can teach someone to drive, right? And it's a smaller tractor that it's not a high intensity type piece of equipment, but yet you still need someone in that tractor paying them $15 to $20 an hour that's reliable in there. And so I think understanding labor availability, and if you can find someone that you want to put in another tractor, that's going to be key. If you're struggle to fill the labor needs that you have currently, maybe not adding another operator is what you want to do.
Okay. We've got a good question here from Mr. Alan Young. With your estimates, Ryan, the benefits seem to assume premium quality. Was most of the sampled hay from your steamer experiments tested at premium quality?
I know that it was tested. What are the criteria for, I don't know the exact criteria for premium quality as far as.
I think that it's like relative feed value over 185 and crude protein 21 to 22%, I think constitutes like supreme or premium type hay.
So what was that relative feed value, Spencer, above what?
185.
Okay, we were close to that on most of that, right? We were close to that from the test that we took. I'm looking at our report here. So I'm looking at that. We were close to that 180 mark on all of our tests. We're bordering right on that premium quality alfalfa.
Okay. So really the economics are, if you've got really good alfalfa in the field and you want to make something of it, this might just pencil out for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got another one for Spencer. How hot, we've got a reader or a watcher writes in, how hot do the bales get with the steamer or the dew simulator? And how long does it take for those bales to cool down? And then what is the moisture of those bales compared to untreated bales?
So I can't answer for the dew simulator because I have done some operating with the Harvest Tech crew with Bryant Henningfield, but I haven't done enough to answer for their behalf. On the steam side, though, with steamer, on average, I mean, you can get the temperature of the bale to be as hot as 125 to 135 degrees. Every machine that ships actually ships with a temperature probe, so that the operator knows exactly what the temperature is in the bale. And that temperature probe actually has kind of a green, a yellow, and a red zone. If we're in the green zone, you're okay to keep baling, and you're okay to actually haul it out of the field at that point in time too. If you're in the yellow zone, you're okay to keep baling, but you're going to want to let the hay sit in the field a little bit to cool down before you haul it. And once we get into the red zone, which is above 135 degrees Fahrenheit, that's when you need to stop baling. Those bales are too warm, and we need to just stop baling because there's either too much steam or not enough relative humidity or just too hot of a temperature. So that's, and as far as the time that it takes to cool them down, it can vary from as little as 2 or 3 to 6 hours to as much as 24 to 48 hours. Especially what we found is if people are baling hay that is not fully cured. If it did have a little bit of stem moisture in it, but it was in a state that it could be still baled, sometimes we see a little bit of heating in the bale after the fact. And in general, it doesn't, if it was totally uncured, then yes, you're going to spoil that hay. If you're kind of pushing the limits, so to speak, it could take as much as 24 to 48 hours to cool those bales down. So the general rule of thumb is to make sure that that hay is fully cured before you go in there with steam, because the steam will add anywhere from 2 to 3 points of moisture percentage. So if the hay is being baled at 10, we're going to raise it up to as high as 13 to almost 14. If it's already at, say, 13 or 14, we could be pushing it up over that 17, 18 mark. And if we didn't have a preservative, we could run the risk of spoilage. So
Okay. Okay.
One more thing I wanted to add too, and I'll speak to the Do Simulator on this one as well, is that it's not just for premium quality hay that you know is sitting in the field. I would argue both machines have the ability to actually make not so good hay actually better hay because of the leaf retention characteristics that both technologies can actually help mitigate.
Okay. Well, you know, we spend so much time getting the right varieties and babying it along and getting it, you know, cut and taken care of with the right technologies. You know, when we trip over our own feet getting it in the bale and then into the shed, that always hurts everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've got another question from the audience. What's the additional horsepower requirements to pull the steamer and the baler? And I'll add on to that one for Ryan. That additional horsepower, does that play a part in our economic analysis?
I'm glad Spencer's on the line because I didn't quantify. I assumed that they could use the same tractor that they're pulling their baler with, that they could also pull the steamer. So I know there may be a little change just because of the additional weight. I didn't quantify or want to go out on a limb and try and guesstimate what that additional fuel usage or whatever. So I just assumed that they use the same tractor. Spencer, what's your?
Correct. So unless the tractor is already under horsepowered for the baler that it's already pulling, let's say it's like only 125 or 140 horse, maybe 150 horse tractor, and you're getting away with that, you might be a little under horsepowered to pull the steamer. But most people who are running a 3x3, 3x4, and especially the 4x4 baler, they're already running 200 plus horsepower tractors, and anybody who has 200 horse is going to be just fine with a steamer. The only exception would be in really sandy and more hilly country. So our Western Kansas guys that are in Western Kansas, they've horsepowered up a little bit because they've got a lot of sandy hills in Western Kansas. Some of our guys in Idaho that deal with more hilly country have horsepowered up a little bit. And in general, it's not like 100, 150. We're talking 25 to 75 horsepower upgrades for some of these tractors to be able to just pull through the hills. In terms of just extra fuel used, I've never had any customers come back and say, we're burning way more diesel than we used to be by just pulling the steamer. That's just not something that we hear from our customer group. And we've got well over 400 of them out there operating now. So it's just not something that I've heard of in terms of increased fuel usage. Besides the cost of I mean, you are burning more diesel in the fact that you're running the steamer, yes. As far as the tractor, I've never heard reports back though.
Okay.
And Jenny, my estimates include the diesel that's being burned in the steamer, right? So I included that. I just didn't include anything from the tractor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And also, Jenny, as a follow-up to Alan Young, so I just quickly ran into my spreadsheet, and if I drop that price to 175, you take about $1.50, $2 off those net benefits that were reported in the presentation. So you could just subtract $1.50, $2 off those per acre net benefits. So just over $10 and around $13 if I drop that price down to average quality alfalfa.
So even if you've got average quality alfalfa out there in the field, it still pencils out.
It's still a positive net benefit, right? $10 an acre net benefit.
Well, and considering the price of alternative feeds this year, and the fact that we've had drought in certain parts of our alfalfa growing regions, whatever bales that you can get off this year, it seems like from our previous speakers that we've had in the previous two sessions, it sounds like you're going to have a market for them of someplace. So it really does pay to really put pencil to paper, it sounds like, right, Ryan?
Correct. Exactly right.
Okay. Any other economic thoughts, Ryan, as we're going into the season? Any other things that from your crystal ball that you want people to think about?
Yeah, as you're talking about drought, right? That's something that's been in almost every one of our discussions. We've been talking about drought, and one thing that that these net benefits may not capture is the difference between getting a crop off and not getting a crop. In some situations, right, if you can get in, like that farmer said in that video, right, those 600 acres, that storm was coming in. So the difference between that, I may be underestimating some of those benefits, right? That's what I want to say, is that you need to really analyze this and understand the benefits that you could incur, whether getting a crop off or getting a one that's been rained on 3 times, right? Because we always say, if you want it to rain, tell your neighbor to go cut his alfalfa, right? That's the bottom line. And Spencer, you tell me my 4450 can't pull the steamer and the baler now? My old 4450? Oh man.
We've got an old 4850 that we've baled with before, and it, on flat ground, we were just fine with a 4850. That's, I don't think it's a souped up 4850. It's probably about 175 or 180 horse. So
they haven't turned it up then yet, huh?
Well, well, gentlemen, thank you so very much. Thanks for hopping on, Spencer, because we started seeing questions in the chat regarding the equipment, and I thought, you know what, maybe let's just make sure that the experts in the technology are there to answer those questions, because I knew I didn't have the answers. And Ryan, thank you so very much for joining us today and bringing this great economic information to our farmers, mostly because as we know, this business, you have to put pencil to paper and make sure everything pencils out for you. So thanks, gentlemen. We'll see you on the trail. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hey folks, we're going to go ahead and give you a little bit of time now to get up, move around, maybe get that extra cup of coffee while we line up our next 2 speakers, Dan Undersander, and then Steve Norberg is going to return to the screen with some final thoughts. We're going to come back here to the screen in 5 minutes. Well, welcome back, everyone. For those of you just joining us, my name is Jennifer Latsky, and I'm the Associate Editor of High Plains Journal. I'm your moderator for this 3rd session of High Plains Journal's virtual Alfalfa U. In this second part of our session, we're going to hear from Dan Undersander with some helpful advice in controlling leaf loss during harvesting. And finally, we're going to wrap up today by returning to your screens Steve Norberg, helping us to understand how molecular markers can advance quality traits for alfalfa and how you might someday be able to market those. By the way, we know that there is a lot of you on the line who are joining us from your homes with some of your families watching. High Plains Journal is proud of our commitment to the next generation of farmers and ranchers. And that's why now, through April 30th, High Plains Journal is donating 25% of all subscription revenue to a state FFA organization of your choice. Visit hpjsubscribe.com/FFA now through April 30th to help FFA members in your local communities. And mark your calendars for our future U events coming live and in person in 2021. Our High Plains Journal's Cattle U and Trade Show will be July 29th and 30th. And our brand new Farmer U in August will feature more alfalfa learning opportunities. Watch the pages of High Plains Journal for details, or you can visit cattleu.net or farmeru.net to register today. We couldn't do events like this, whether in person or online, without the tremendous support of our sponsor partners. We want to thank our premier sponsors, Alforex and John Deere, and our associate sponsors for this session, STAHELIWEST and Harvest Tech. Now remember, we've already muted your video and your microphones. And if you have questions, please click on the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen and type your questions in the pop-up box that appears. You can ask those questions anytime throughout the session, and we'll pose them to our speakers during their Q&A time. All of our sessions are being recorded, and the recordings will be posted soon after we're done on hpj.com/alfalfau. And registered attendees will be emailed a notification when those recordings are posted. Now, here's the QR code for your CEU credits. And if you miss it, we'll be able to share it on the recordings as well. If you have any questions, you can email Kylie Reese at KREISS@hpj.com, and she'll be able to help you. And we'll have that contact information in the chat box as well. Now, before we rejoin our program, here's a word from our premier sponsor, Alforex Seeds. And joining us again on the screen is Doug Bastian, North America sales leader for Alforex Seeds. Welcome back, Doug. We are going to hear more from Alforex next week, right?
Absolutely. We're looking forward to it. And we're going to be highlighting a few things next week. One in particular is, how drone technology is being utilized in our alfalfa research program to better enhance and move forward our breeding for the traits and different things people are looking for as we move forward. So really looking forward to that.
I cannot wait. And folks, that session will be March 11th. And if you're a registered attendee of Alfalfa U, you'll get those links to that in your email box next week. And I believe we have a word from Alforex, right, Doug?
That is correct. So for us, we just hope you really enjoyed this first half of the show here today, and also the second half as we continue forward. And we've been a proud sponsor of Alfalfa U for several years and look forward to its continued success. I know next week, the other thing that we look forward to is a farmer panel that has always been a highlight and a hit with a lot of folks. So I hope everybody comes back and tunes in for that farmer panel session as well. With that, I'll turn it back to you, Jenny.
Thanks, Doug. And we'll see you all next week, especially for the farmer panel, our tailgate talk. And now with a word with our Alforex special word.
Alforex Seeds prides itself in having over 300 distributors and dealers across the U.S. representing the Alforex and Dairyland Seed brands. Alforex Seeds, in combination with the Dairyland Seed brand that we support, we have one of the largest portfolio of products in the market today. But don't take it from me. Why don't we take a little bit of time and listen to some of our very satisfied customers and how our products performed on their farm. Again, welcome to Alfalfa University, and here, let's take a listen to some of our customers.
Mike Nielsen stated, "This is our first field of Higest and it's doing well. The first 3 crops are testing better than neighboring circles of competitive varieties. So far, we like what we see." Jake Brock shared, "We're on a 3-cut system and tonnage is big time for us. That's why we moved to AFX 469 from another Alforex variety. From the looks of this 160-acre field, we'll be getting the yield bump from this high-ton alfalfa we were looking for." Danny Joe Farms stated, "When salinity is a problem, getting a picture-perfect stand can be a concern. Not so for Danny Joe Farms, LLC at La Mesa, New Mexico. Their dealer, Scale Ag in Las Cruces, New Mexico, recommended PGI 908S for their 100-acre field that tends to be high on salinity. The field was seeded on September 23rd, and the photo was taken on October 30th. Mike Schuppe stated, Dairyland HybriForce 3420 consistently yields a fine-stemmed product that tests well and is a favorite among our customers.
Well, thanks for those messages, Alforex Seeds. And later on in this session, we'll hear from our other premier sponsor, John Deere, and our associate sponsor, STAHELIWEST. Remember, you'll be able to find more information about all of our sponsors and the services and products that they provide in your registration packet and materials. You can also find more information online at hpj.com/Alfalfa U. Well, now it's time to get started with our speaker, Dr. Dan Undersander. Dr. Undersander is a familiar face to many of you who have joined us at Alfalfa U in years past. Dr. Undersander conducted irrigated forage research in the Texas High Plains for 10 years before moving to Wisconsin 32 years ago, where he coordinated the multi-department extension forages team at the University of Wisconsin. He conducted research on grazing, forage production, forage harvesting, forage utilization, and on near-infrared reflectance, or NIR, and that prediction of forage quality and other parameters. Today, Dr. Undersander will help us control that leaf loss at harvest so that we can make sure that profit stays in the bale and not in the field. Dr. Undersander, welcome, sir. The screen is all yours.
Thank you. All right, so we've been doing a lot of work on leaf loss over the last number of years, and frankly, the problem is much worse than most of us realize. And there are certainly machinery differences, and we've heard about steaming, which is a big impact in terms of maintaining leaves. But an awful lot of what we need to think about is simply the whole management of the hay making system. My concern always is that while we may have a few new pieces of equipment, and we're certainly got phones that we didn't have 20 years ago and trucks that we didn't have 20 years ago, we're still making hay like we did 20 years ago. And that's a major problem in terms of yield and quality limitations. Just to give a starting point and how big the water loss issue is, it's important to recognize that alfalfa is something around 75% moisture when it's cut, give or take a few points. And this means that 2 tons of dry matter yield must lose about 5.7 tons of water, or 1,370 gallons per acre, to dry down to 13% moisture. And some of us are trying to dry a little further, in which case the moisture loss is even greater. The important thing in this whole process, though, is that the quality is basically in the leaves of alfalfa. When we look at leaves, they run around 15 to 20% NDF, or about 450 relative forage quality. The stems run around 60 to 70% NDF, or about 70 relative forage quality. Now, when we look, you see the graph on the right there, we collected a number of samples over several years from 3 different research studies in different states. And what we found was that about 70% of the difference in forage quality is due to leaf percentage. This was more important than maturity. We can get a little bit of a feel for that on our own, because if we're cutting alfalfa at the bud stage, which many of us are doing for the market or for dairy quality hay, that alfalfa should be something around 50% leaves and 50% stems. So as your hay falls below 50% stems, then the quality goes down. And I'm learning it's amazingly easy to do this. So let's think about a couple things. One is to mow with a roller conditioner that's properly adjusted. And most of the companies have flail or impeller conditions available. And most of them make roller conditioners with either steel or rubber, as polyurethane, as we've seen in John Deere's video. It is important to recognize that the flail impellers function by scraping the stem. The roller conditioners condition by breaking the stem. The flail conditioners were developed in Europe for grass, and the roller conditioners were really developed for alfalfa. And so what we see is that the roller conditioners are for alfalfa, the flail conditioners are for grass, and we should never consider changing that. We'll see about a 4 to 7% yield leaf loss if we use a flail impeller conditioner on alfalfa. Works fine on grass, but is not appropriate. So just a couple other thoughts. Most of you are probably cash hay growers, but do consider that conditioning is necessary for hay, but not for haylage. In fact, most of our contract harvesters have gone away from conditioning when they're harvesting haylage for silage, and the same would be for wrap bales or baleage. If we're going to put that forage up at about 55 or 60% moisture, we can lose that much from the leaves, and we don't need to condition. But the second and most important thing is condition alfalfa and alfalfa grass mixtures with a roller conditioner. Now, what I'm showing here in these pictures are frankly conditioners that are making a very wide swath, and that is an important consideration for us. If we want to dry our hay as quickly as possible. And on the one hand, that's intuitive, but on the other hand, many of us don't pay attention to it. Through most of the Pacific Northwest, we should be able to dry hay and bale it in 2, maybe 3 days at the outside. I'm fully aware that the average time hay is left on the field is usually 5 to 7 days and sometimes longer. But I would like to suggest to you that the longer it takes to dry, the more quality you're going to lose. The longer it takes to dry, the more yield you're going to lose from that harvested hay. And the longer it takes to dry, the more yield you're losing from the next crop, because it started to grow up and you're going to drive over it. You also didn't get your irrigation on as quickly as you could have. So there's a lot of reasons to want to dry that hay as quickly as possible. Just a little bit of food for thought. Here are some of the factors that affect drying of forage. And I'd like to start with thinking about the single most important factor in drying hay is solar radiation. And this is where the Pacific Northwest has the biggest advantage and the best drying conditions of any place in the world. The question I would have is how many of you are putting your hay in a windrow and only using a third or less of the solar radiation that falls on the field versus how many of you are spreading that hay out and using more of the free solar radiation that's available to you. The other consideration is the next biggest factor that makes a difference in drying rate is the swath density. So the more you bunch it into a pile, the slower it's going to dry. And that's something that does affect you. Obviously, relative humidity or difference and soil moisture content can be a consideration in some areas. the humidity does affect the drying rate of the surface of the windrow. Air temperature is a factor. Many are surprised that wind speed's not on here, and wind speed is beneficial in terms of moving evaporated moisture away from the windrow, but it didn't rank in the top 5 considerations for drying alfalfa. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that, again, the Pacific Northwest particularly has an advantage of low humidity. But when you put that hay in a windrow and water evaporates inside that windrow, the interior of the windrow quickly approaches 95% humidity. So when we put hay into a windrow, we effectively stop drying the interior of that windrow or dramatically slow it down. And so what you typically see is a windrow like this. If you put hay immediately into a windrow, the next morning the exterior is dry, the interior is as green as when you cut it. And we see the same thing with, particularly here's a picture of alfalfa. One of our major leaf losses, of course, we don't want the leaves to turn if we're selling hay. But also as the leaves on the surface, whether they stay green or not, become brittle, that's when we have our leaf loss. The last consideration in drying rate is that the leaves of alfalfa have holes on the bottom for the plant to breathe when it's growing. These holes are open in daylight and closed at night. So when we mow alfalfa and put it in a wide swath, we have more of these leaves in the sunlight, and moisture loss will be more rapid. When we put it into a windrow, these holes close, and then the leaves are between 2 layers of wax, and they just don't dry as well. So for a lot of reasons, we want to have hay in a wide swath to encourage drying for the initial phases. And this is the key step between a 2-day drying and a 5 to 7 day drying. The other thing, of course, that happens is in terms of cutting the alfalfa, it continues to respire and break down starches and sugars till it falls below about 60% water. So whenever we're harvesting that alfalfa, we want it to dry and lose that first 15% water as quickly as possible. Again, the West has an advantage on this, but you can imagine that hay that was inside the windrow and stayed green continued to respire for some period of time. So generally speaking, what we see from a wide swath is higher forage quality. We see increased yield because we keep more of the sugars. The other thing for you to consider, and we've done this study in a number of states, including some in the Northwest, consider that alfalfa around harvest time grows about 150 to 200 pounds a day. So if you leave your alfalfa on the field 5 days, you've lost 5 days of growth and almost 1,000 pounds of hay off the next cutting. If you can get it off faster, you can get that alfalfa regrowing, and you do not have that loss in yield from the next cutting. So the next cutting increases in yield as we make a wide swath and get that hay off faster. The second consideration is to use a rotary rake or merger. And I know a lot of hay is put up with wheel rakes, but that is the one that it's the cheapest. On the other hand, it incorporates the most dirt into the hay, and it does have the highest leaf loss. What you see from a study that we did with 4 different types of hay accumulators is that the leaf percentage from a rotary rake and the merger were about 1 to 2% higher than from a wheel rake or a sidebar or basket rake. So clearly the rake type is important, and the The wheel rake and sidebar rake are those that, while the equipment is the cheapest, they do cause the most loss of leaves during harvesting. So as we're thinking about raking, again, I'd suggest you start with a wide swath. I know much of the West is concerned about bleaching, but bleaching doesn't occur until the leaves have completely dried. So depending on what time of day you mow, you can merge that into some kind of a windrow in 16 to 24 hours and have minimal leaf bleaching. In all cases, it's important to rake so the tines minimally touch the soil. And I think this is something that we don't pay enough attention to, and pickups of balers. The machinery industry tells me that particularly on rakes, the most common piece that they have to replace are bent and broken tines. And so that tells me that we're digging too far into the soil. Rake to move the forage minimal distance with rotary rakes, move both sides to the middle. With a merger and a conveyor, it doesn't make any difference. But the other consideration is to think about ground speed. I know we're all in a hurry. We're all trying to get as much done as we can. But clearly, the faster we move the forage with a rake or a merger, the more we rattle that forage, the more leaf loss we have. And I think in both cases here, you can see leaves flying off of that forage that is being moved. Some of the merger dealers have recognized this and have put screens over the pickup to essentially recollect the leaves that are shattered from the windrow as it is going through the merger and put into the windrow. I just wanted to show you a little data about how significant this leaf loss can be. We did a 3-state study, and it was actually Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania a few years ago. And we harvested with multiple kinds of rakes. But in every case, we looked at the percentage of leaves at different stages in the harvesting process. And here's one example that I'll admit was not normal, but it does show what is possible. We started with 59% leaves, and we ended up with 55% leaves in the bale forage. On the other hand, this was a more common scenario across the harvest over the states, where we started with something around 50% leaves, and mowing and raking caused a 1% loss, nothing significant. But then we lost about 20% of the leaves in raking, and essentially no more to baling. Now, that looks horrendous to you, but it's far more common than we realize. And one of the things that I want to point out to you is we're not just talking about a quality loss, we're talking about a yield loss. And so we take that graph from the previous slide, and I'm just going to plot the standing forage or the pre-cut, the after raking when we had lost so many leaves, and then the harvest. If we plot those three and we look at the stems versus the leaves, then I probably didn't do this one quite right. But if we assume that we didn't lose any stems, then what you see is that here on the first cutting, we were about 50-50. And on the harvested forage, we were down around, left the leaves the same, and looked at that 28% leaves. What we saw then was that was a 17% yield loss. So going from the 50% leaves down to the 1/3, 2/3 that was harvested was not just a loss in quality, but a tremendous loss in yield. Now, we've done a lot more studies over the last few years, and what we found is even harvesting for haylage, we're losing about 10% of the leaves or about 10% of our yield in the harvesting process. And the concern is as we go to making dry hay, even in the West, if we're not very careful, the loss is going to be even greater. So the thing that I would like to suggest is that we really need to manage our harvesting equipment. What happened in that previous slide? Well, we maybe let it dry a bit too much. We maybe raked it too fast. We did a number of things that caused truly significant yield loss. The other thing is we can have significant yield loss during harvesting, and that's where these steamers we saw in the previous talk become so valuable to us. I'm in fact thinking that we should even be using this sometimes, or using some of the principles for harvesting haylage in various states. I want you to look at that green cloud around the truck taking the chopped forage. Those are all leaves that are being lost, and that's our, at best, 10% loss in yield and greater loss in quality. I'm thinking, what has happened is that the windrow has laid out, the leaves on the surface particularly have become brittle, and then what we see is that they shatter in the harvesting process. So we definitely have leaf loss for haylage. Making round bales, we know that we have leaf loss, and I didn't have a good picture of it, but this is a great tool for making hay, grass hay. I would suggest that it's less good for alfalfa. If you've ever walked behind one of those balers and watched the bales rotating in the chamber as they're being made, you can see that pieces are falling off the bale between the belts. And again, that's largely leaves on the top. Probably aren't too many of you making bales this way anymore, though in some parts of the country, that's a big deal for the horse industry. But a portion of the reason I put this picture in is again to remind us, if you look at this dust here behind the baler, a lot of that's leaves. And any of you that have ever taken bales off the bale chamber, you can see a layer of fines coming out below those bales. And that, of course, was a leaf loss and a yield loss in the harvesting process. Now, with our straight through balers, we're doing a much better job than we used to be doing. There's no question about it. But there are a few things to keep in mind. The pickup design can be important in terms of the leaf loss in the harvesting process. And of course, this is where the steamer or some other piece of equipment fits in between to dampen that hay prior to the harvesting process. Again, raking or baling with dew on, as we heard in the first talk today, is definitely a good process. And I would suggest even for chopping haylage, this might be a good process. And then you have the steamers that truly do improve the quality of our forage. So in summary, as we're looking at controlling leaf loss, we want to mow with the roller conditioner properly adjusted. And I maybe didn't say this enough, but that needs to be adjusted for every field, depending on the tonnage that you have. What you'd like to see is that the roller's adjusted sufficiently tight that there is 1 to 5% leaf bruising. If there is no leaf bruising, you're not adjusting, you're not conditioning sufficient to maximize the drying rate of the stem. We do want to dry as quickly as possible. We have less chance for rain. We want to lose the first 15% water to minimize respiratory losses. And of course, we'd like to avoid those rains that come through that you hear. Number 3, I know, is something that's a challenge for all of us, but I do believe that a rotary rake or a merger are the best tools for minimizing leaf loss. The key in all cases is not to get to excessive speeds. We all want to get through our haymaking quicker, but do recognize that the faster these machines run, the harder they are on the hay and the greater our leaf loss. And then the fourth and last thing I'd suggest in controlling leaf loss is managing the harvesting equipment. There are some designs that will minimize the loss. I mentioned screens over the pickup. There is the due equipment that we've seen in the previous presentation. There are other things that we should pay attention to. While there are some machinery designs that are helpful, it is important to recognize that one of the largest impacts on leaf percentage is the timing of the process and the management of that by the operator. So I strongly encourage each of us to think about it, to analyze your harvested forage, whether baled or chopped, to think about how close you are to 50% leaves in that forage. And anything less than that is going to represent a yield and a quality loss. Again, I will say what we have seen in our studies for harvesting haylage is that the average is about a 9% leaf loss during harvesting, which is a 10 or 12% yield loss. And there is the potential as we rake more, as we go to dry hay, for losses to be even higher than that. So do think about making some changes to your harvesting management. Particularly look at the leaf percentage in your harvested hay. And if you're not close to 50% leaves, do think about what you might do differently to cause that to happen in the future. And with that, I'm finished. Maybe a little short on time, but that's all right. We can take questions.
All righty. Well, thank you, Dr. Understander. That's always a good refresher for everybody, because we know in our heads what we should be doing, but sometimes we just get in a hurry, don't we?
Exactly.
Well, folks, it's time for questions, and it looks like we've got a few on the chat box. Remember, just click that button and type those in, and we'll share those here. Dr. Understander, we have a question from one of our viewers. Should they spread the swath out so the raking tractor runs over it or doesn't run over it?
That's always a big question, and we've put a lot of time and effort into that. And what I'd like to suggest to you is you're going to lose either way. The question is, which way are you going to lose the least? And all of our data suggests that the least loss is to spread the swath out, keep it on top of the stubble, and drive over it. If that really worries you, you could go down to a swath that is maybe 80, 85% of the cut area. And then when you mow the next round, you can drive with one wheel in between the swaths, and then the other wheel will come closer to the middle of the swath, which has less hay in it than either edge of the swath.
I kind of feel like we just had a car talk moment, because I think we might have just settled a debate in that household, Dr. Understander.
It's a common question.
Well, as you all get ready to type in those questions, you have a lot of really great tricks and tips and things. When you're working with somebody that is brand new to haying and we've just hired them on, what are some things that you would advise new employees, if they were your employees, how do you train new labor to make sure that leaf stays in the bale and not in the field?
I think the important part in the training process is to give the employee an image of what they want the final product to look like. And at times I've even gone out to the field with somebody and walked behind the rake or the merger and looked at the leaves on the ground and asked, now what can we do to reduce this? Because this is yield and quality that we're losing. So I think first begin with an overall objective, then take a little bit of time to show that leaves are being lost. It goes back to the picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yep. You mentioned going back and looking at your settings. How often should we be tweaking our equipment? Are we talking every field or 2 or 3 times in that field? How often should we just come down off the equipment and just start looking at stuff?
Well, I would suggest that it's important to do it on essentially every field. Pull in with particularly the mower in terms of the conditioner setting. Mow and condition 100 feet and get off and look at the swath, or the next time, or on the first, after having made a round, look to see if there's any bruising. The conditioner setting should change. On roller conditioners, we have 2 settings. We have the spacing and we have the tension. And the tension should be in relation to the yield that you're running through the conditioner. So as every field varies a little bit in yield because of fertilizer or stage of maturity or stand density or whatever, it's important to get off and check that. I've been on farms where people didn't even know how to adjust the tension on their mower. And that's clearly a bad sign. They're very easy to adjust now on all the new harvesting equipment. And so I would strongly recommend that you get off and adjust once in a while. The other thing with conditioners, frankly, steel versus polyurethane, the merging is practically about the same. There's some studies that show one's a little bit better than the other. The real difference is that the steel ones will last a little bit longer. The rubber ones are better if you have stone or volcanic ash or something like that is wearing. So I judge on polyurethane versus steel based on the soil type and condition of the farm. The other thing, though, with polyurethane is they do wear. They will need to be replaced. And so it is important to go into your kitchen, cut a couple 1-foot squares of aluminum foil, roll it up 1 inch in diameter, and feed each one through your conditioner, 1 in the middle and 1 on each end. And the spacing of the thinnest part should be about the thickness of a quarter. And if the middle is much greater than that, then you've had wearing on your rolls and should think about doing something about it in the not too distant future.
All right. I love these practical tips because, all too often we see storm clouds in the distance and we just think, get it in, get it done, but it's the little things that we tweak, and that ends up being money in your pocketbook. Remember, folks, you can ask those questions on the chat anytime. Let's talk about once we've got those bales in the field, and we've baled up everything. Keep minimizing the damage in the field as far as leaving those bales on the field. What are some tips and tricks and some advice for storage, for getting them off in a timely fashion, or minimizing the damage that they may have on the field, just waiting for movement to their ultimate destination?
Well, getting the hay off the field with the minimal driving possible is an important factor. There was some discussion about soil compaction, and on some soils that is an issue. But the main harvest loss that we have seen to driving over a field is to driving over the regrowth shoots as the alfalfa is coming back. And the industry has done a tremendous job of breeding new varieties of alfalfa, but most of them come back a little bit faster than the old ones did. So it's more important now to get the hay off faster than it was 15 or 20 years ago. There are bale accumulators, which are quite helpful. We've seen some data on some of that with GPS tracking and so on. In fact, one little study that one group did with round bales, which I know is not very common in the Northwest, but dropping the bales versus accumulating in groups of 3, they found that on 20 acres that the driving was about 10 times more for picking up the individual bales than for picking up the accumulations of 3 or 4 bales. So this is something that's really important to pay attention to, important to get done as quickly as possible.
All right. Well, it looks like we're out of questions. And Dr. Undersander, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to talk with you about alfalfa and hay and how we can tweak our programs to get just a little bit more value. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Now, while we get our next speaker lined up, here's a word from our sponsor, John Deere.
Now you can get more from your mower conditioner with John Deere 0 Series mower conditioners. Cover up to 10% more acres per hour with the wider cutting width of the C500. This lets you hit tight harvest windows and increase your productivity. The John Deere 0 Series mower conditioners feature side pull and center pivot models with a wide range of cutting widths to meet your needs. Mow with a wider range of tractors and handle hills easier. Use less horsepower and fuel thanks to the lighter weight of the redesigned C400. Customize your windrows to improve dry down thanks to wider conditioning rolls. Width of the windrow is critical to dry down, and the C400 lets you put down windrows of up to 133 inches wide. Many John Deere 0 Series models give you the ability for wider windrows thanks to the forming vanes. This lets you preserve hay quality while giving you more time to bale before Mother Nature strikes. In addition to quicker dry down times, you'll speed up knife replacement. With quick change knives, you can cut time changing knives in half. With a simple tool, you're able to change your knives out in minutes and return to cutting, helping you maintain the best cut quality. You'll also get more choice when it comes to conditioning your crop. The wide variety of models in the 0 Series let you match the conditioning options to best fit your crop and operation. For grasses and grass legume mixes, our economic impeller options fit the bill. The urethane roll is excellent for thicker stem grasses, cane, or legume crops. 2 steel intermeshing options, the V10 and the Trilobe, offer durability with improved crop conditioning. John Deere is confident in the durability of its mower conditioners. To ensure you share this confidence, we've upped our warranty. Now, both parts and labor are covered for all components on the proven low-profile cutter bar for 5 years on all John Deere mower conditioners. Get more productivity, tractor compatibility, uptime, choices, and confidence with John Deere 0 Series mower conditioners.
And now a word from another one of our sponsors, STAHELIWEST.
My name is Don Roberts. I'm a local farmer here in the Parowan Valley with many good farmers around me. The challenge without the steamer is the weather and the elements controlled you. You couldn't sleep when you wanted to sleep. It told you when you had to work or not work. And if you were sick or something happened or there was some problem, you couldn't catch up. You would just have to bale bad hay. And there's many times you'd just close your eyes and bale a lot of bad hay. So it wasn't a hard sell for Dave to try to sell us to try to buy the steamer when he come up with it, because we had all the problems in our head, we had all of the challenges. It was an instantaneous sign me up. I remember the first time we got on the field, it had rained and it had set us back. And I have a farm that's 600 acres over by the mountains, and it had rained and it set us back, and the rain was going to come again. in a couple of days, and it had just got to where it was perfect. And I thought, man, I hope I can get it. And I baled 24 hours straight with one baler, one steamer, and I did 600 acres and baled the whole farm and got it before the next rainstorm hit. And I remember, man, you couldn't have ever done that. And the value was it made poor hay into medium grade hay to low end good hay. And I thought, wow, this just saved a whole bunch of tromping over the next crop because I got the next rainstorm. It just saved me so much money. It works. And not only does it works perfectly. It's not expensive. You can't afford not to have it.
Well, thank you, John Deere, and thanks to our associate sponsors for today's session, STAHELIWEST and Harvest Tech. And folks, be sure to join us next week for our tailgate talk, where we'll bring our farmer panel to your screens to talk about the challenges and opportunities of growing alfalfa. Join us to ask your questions and pick up advice from farmers just like you. And now with our final word of the day, we're bringing back to your screens Steve Norberg. If there's one thing that has always fascinated me, it's the science behind the varieties that we have in our fields. Steve will help us understand the new tools of the alfalfa breeder, molecular markers, and how those molecular markers can advance the quality traits that you will be able to market for profit in the future. Steve, welcome back to the screens. It's so great to see you again.
Good to be back. Okay, this is kind of a project that I never thought I would probably ever do in my agronomic career, but we have a team pulled together, and this slide shows the team that we put together of geneticists, forage quality specialists, and agronomists like myself. And so, again, I'm Steve Norberg, and I'm located in Washington State University. Along-Shi Yu is an ARS geneticist located out of Prosser, Washington. Dave Combs is a forage quality specialist and ruminant nutritionist from University of Wisconsin. We have Glenn Shoemaker with the University of Idaho, and he's a forage specialist there that's just recently retired. We have Goji Wang, who's with Oregon State University, and he grew one of the locations over there along with Glenn Shoemaker. So we had research in Idaho and also in Oregon. We have Don Llewellyn, who's a ruminant nutrition in Washington State University. Sen Lin did a lot of the genetic work along with Along-Shi Yu. And then Steve Franson's our state forage specialist with Washington State University. So again, this is a very broad project from agronomists to geneticists to forage quality specialists. And we really wanted to know how far can the genetics of alfalfa improve quality and to develop a process to do it. Okay, this research was funded by the USDA NIFA project. And again, we're so fortunate that here recently we've had both the NAFA grants that we could get money from, as well as the National Institute of Food and Natural Resources, their NIFA program. And so this took a significant research funds to be able to accomplish what we did. So the objectives that we wanted to do was we wanted to look at the quality of the first harvest of 200 alfalfa plant introductions from all over the world and compare those to 50 varieties that we had from genetic suppliers in the United States and look at them at 3 locations in the Pacific Northwest. We wanted to quantify the genetic diversity of the alfalfa that is related to forage quality. Then we wanted to identify genetic areas associated with forage quality and to develop the process where we could use this genetics to speed up breeding processes by the professional commercial companies. And then we wanted to extend that knowledge gained, and that's what I'm doing today. So we're going to look again at these varieties that we selected. Again, there was 200 total varieties that were grown and a diverse germplasm. And again, it was located at 3 locations in the Pacific Northwest. We used an augmented design, which is a new one that I'd never used before. And then we had some checks in there. We had vernal, and then Alforex Higest 360 as checks in 11 blocks per location. So it's made a very large experiment. Okay, we did DNA analysis of the germplasm of all those that were in the system. And then we did fiber analysis, including NDF, NDF24, NDF30, NDF48, KD, INDF, and TT-NDFD, as well as some others. So in other words, we did an extensive look at fiber in this particular study. And we also determined the genetic areas or molecular markers that related to fiber quality. So let's look a little closer at the plant introductions that were brought. And there was 148 of them from the Plant Material Research Center at USDA in Pullman. And many of you may not realize that we have areas in the United States that are dedicated at preserving germplasm. And these 148 that was received, many of them were accumulated originally in the 1980s, and then they're stored into the proper conditions that they can keep them for a long time. And when they start getting weak, they regrow them. And so the germplasm that's been gathered from all over the world is housed in these facilities. And then we matched those 148 that we selected out of there with 52 varieties ranging from S&W seed, Alforex or Curtiva, and Legacy seeds and Blue River hybrids. So let's look a little deeper dive at what we looked at. So we had 138 varieties that came either from the United States or from Canada. In other words, they came from North America. We had 21 of them that came from Turkey, which again is kind of, we feel is the origin of alfalfa. We had Central Asia, we had from Afghanistan, Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. We had 14 entries from there. We had 9 from Eastern Europe, including Belarus and the Russian Federation. We had 8 entries from China. We had 4 entries from the Central Europe, including Czech Republic, Denmark, France, and Germany. We had 4 from Greece, Morocco, Romania, and Spain, so 1 each. And we had 1 from Australia and 1 from Japan. So again, we had varieties from all over the world into this study, and we wanted to look at hay quality and yield. And so we used Vernal and Higest 360 as our, Vernal was the low quality check and Higest 360 was our high quality check. And again, the fall dormancy rating was 2 and 3. And so then we got fall dormancy checks of Maverick, Pioneer, Legend, Archer, and ABI 700. These are standards in the industry for fall dormancy, and they range from 1 to 6. And then we had some other released U.S. cultivars with published fall dormancy ratings that we included into the trial. So again, these are the check varieties that kind of determine what fall dormancy checks to look at. And so these are the varieties, and we kind of went through them before, so we'll go ahead and go on to the next slide here. So this is where we grew the varieties out. So we had Prosser, Washington, which is south central Washington with an elevation of 665 feet. We had Union, Oregon, which is kind of in between a mountain range in here, and elevation of 2,700, almost 2,800 feet. And then we had Kimberly, Idaho, which is in south central Idaho, and it had elevation of 4,000 feet. So these were the 3 locations that was grown. This is a picture of the Prosser location, and each one of these squares is a different variety. And this is just a picture before the second cutting on 8/23/2018. So we did a special kind of analysis called canonical analysis that we tried to split it into 4 clusters, we call them. And so this graph is a little bit, seems like it's backwards, but the low quality cluster is on the right and the high quality clusters on the left. So the purple is the good. And so we based them on relative feed quality. And so these were the clusters of all those 200 varieties that were entered in there. And so we'll look a little bit more and see what else came through. So this is another look at relative feed quality. You can see that the range was from one up here that was almost to 210, all the way down here to just a little over 150. So we had quite a range, and these were all grown in the similar conditions. And so again, the A group was the high quality group. And so on all these slides that I'm going to look at, so this little dotted line is where vernal is. Many of us probably know that vernal is a fall dormancy too. And so this is the quality here. This is High-Gest 360. So we kind of look at this as kind of the state of the industry for high quality at the time of the start of this experiment. And again, no GMOs were included in this study. And so we're looking all at just traits that are natural to alfalfa. So this looks at crude protein. And here you can see it ranged from 21 all the way up to 25. And here you can see that here's vernal, and then there's your High-Gest significantly higher up here. So we can see that there's a range in what's out there for germplasm that we can work with. Okay, this is looking at ANDF, and again, of course, we want a low ANDF, and so here's your high quality group. You got one that's really down here, and then some as high as 42, and some as low as lower than 36. TTNDFD, so that's total tract nodule detergent fiber digestibility. And so it's kind of, I call it the Cadillac of digestibility. And so it considers the total tract of the animal. Well, let's look at the quality again. So it ranged from a low of 42 to a high of over 50. And again, you see that there's even room of improvement in digestibility for High-Gest 360 to improve, and also for vernal. But again, the High-Gest is doing well already. So the question is we've got all these numbers, what does it really mean? You know, and I think that producers in general have a challenge because their product has at least 3 different traits that are valuable to the people they're selling their hay to. And so we're going to talk today about the elite alfalfa, which is the highest value of hay, and that's the dairy cows. And so what we did was we found out, based on all the dairy feedstuffs in the area, and used to calculate competitive values, we found out what the values would be for energy, which we used net energy for lactation from NRC 2001. We used metabolizable protein, and we used fiber. And we want some fiber, but too much limits the animal's ability to eat more, which limits milk production. So those are the 3 value strains that people buy alfalfa. And if you just think about it, a lot of times we just measure the energy, and RFV, that's all it does, is it measures energy. And even RFQ really looks at protein from an energy source. So there isn't a separate value just strictly to protein. Now this I wanted you to look at, and this process that I'm going to value the alfalfa is I got from a presentation from Bill Weiss, and here's a slide that talks about how NDF digestibility affects dry matter intake. So here we got dry matter intake of the dairy cow on the vertical axis, and here we got the IV and DFD in percentages. And here you can see that the dry matter intake increases as the digestibility increases, okay? And so they've captured this, and we want to have the digestibility of the hay to increase, and the cow just eats more. Okay, and so how do we do that based on that increase in eating more and lower fiber? How much is that worth? Well, when milk is $16 a hundredweight and hay is, we'll say, 8 cents per pound of dry matter, then that's worth $5 per ton. Okay, and so we add or subtract this $5 for every % increase of the digestibility. Okay, I wanted to throw this in here because I think when we're working with hay, what is the value of the nutrients? You know, so we've calculated that for this experiment, but I thought over time you should see how the prices change. So this talks about dates from September 17th to June of 2020. And look at the price, the nutrient value. And you can see that NDF, which is the fiber value, hangs around here and goes pretty level and may get as high as 10 cents per pound. And the energy is worth 10 cents, a little over 10 to 15 cents per megacalorie for the feed stuff. But look at this is what really has been varying over time most significantly, and that's the protein value. So this is the metabolizable protein. It's been as high as 45, and it's dropped down. And I haven't calculated it recently, but it might be up at 45 or even greater because our protein, soybeans have been going through the roof. And so that value, the nutrient value for protein is probably way back up there. And I should add more dates to this time frame. But this data came from Tebb and Weiss in 2020. And so in 2021, we need to get the new values up there. But let's look at how this affects the price of hay and the nutrient value of that hay. So if you look at this, this is the maximum value of the materials in our study. This was the minimum. This is High-Gest 360, our high quality check. And here's Vernal, that's our low quality check. So the protein values per ton averaged over the 2 years. You can kind of see here that, you know, that the low was $68 a ton and the high was $83 a ton worth of protein value. The energy value is 113 up to 135. And the fiber value, $50 up to $61 a ton. And then the quality adjustment, look at this. Minimum, we got to jump at $3.60, but look at this jump. If we get our digestibility up, look at that jump. We added $103 per ton based on the digestibility of that hay. Okay, so that gave us a range from $247 a ton to $372 per ton. What this will tell you is that we're probably not getting paid for all the nutrient value for our real high quality hay unless we're reaching these kind of prices. So then we broke down, okay, into that value, which one of these constituents had the biggest impact on the dollars per ton of hay, okay? Here's our digestibility value that we used in this situation, the NDFD 48. We see that High-Gest has 63.5% digestibility, but the optimum was 67.7. And look how much just that little bit of adjustment makes was $20, almost $21 a ton. That we have room for improvement in digestibility. In crude protein, we can add another $5.50 per ton. If we decrease the ash, we can probably add another $2.24 per ton. If we decrease lignin, we can probably add another $1.50 in there. The fat range was starting getting into smaller, like 50 cents in there. NDICP, which is neutral detergent insoluble crude protein, we have the capability of adding 24 cents per ton, and ADICP 26 cents a ton. So a total, if everything was optimized to the best of all the genetics that we measured there, we would have the capability of nearly $30 a ton increase over High-Gest 360, which is already a high quality material. So one thing about all these measurements of constituents in our hay is that they're interrelated. They're significantly correlated. And so we wanted to see how that was going to affect the dollar value of the hay if we started selecting, say, for neutral detergent fiber digestibility. Of course, it's related to itself perfectly, but actually it's positively related with protein. That's a good thing. So as we increase digestibility, we also are increasing protein. ANDF, it's negatively correlated with both of these, and so that's good. As ANDF decreases, we want digestibility to increase, and we want crude protein to increase. Again, crude protein, we kind of talked about that before. So ash was the one thing that's going to work against us. So as we increase digestibility, as in this column, Our ash is probably going to increase a little bit, and both with protein and with digestibility. The lignin is going to go the right direction. Fats are going to go the right direction. And these others these two here were not statistically significant. So the only thing we got to look about is the ash potential to increase in the plant as we increase digestibility and protein. So if you look back, if ash went back, we're only talking about $2 a ton. But here we have all this other gain that we can get of almost $30 a ton. Okay, now this is getting a little bit more into the science of it. But in our work, we've been able to identify molecular markers on the chromosomes of the alfalfa. So here we got the little balls here represent a specific one. So this is ANDF. It's found on the first chromosome at this location here. And we have that digital number for it. But these are the different constituents that we found molecular markers for, including ANDF, UNDF240, NDICP, milk value per ton. So that was kind of and then we have sugar, ethanol soluble carbohydrates. Here's one for energy, NEL, is the dark green one up here. Okay. Here's TTNDFD. Here's fats, and here's the NDFD traditional 30 hours. And so these are the ones that we've identified so far. We're in the process of looking at some more, but these were significant over all 3 states in the 2 years. And so these are the ones that we have the most confidence in that we have correct. But there are more out there that we have found, but they were not consistent across all locations and times. And so this is significant advancement. Now let's talk a little bit about yield. We also took yield in this study. And so we wanted to know what the relationship between the yield and quality was. And so we took in here and took some measurements on the yield. And so here was our total yield that we received over the period of time. This happens to be in megagrams per hectare, but it's just look at the continuing from low to high. So here we have the High-Gest 360. It was higher than the vernal in yield. But look at what we have room for increase to do here. So we have room for significant increases in yield to go. And so here again, we see that we have quite a range all the way from 35 all the way down to 25 megagrams per hectare. And again, you can see the vernal, and here's your High-Gest 360. So there's even room again for there. So now we look at this and we say, let's plot yield against RFQ. It's a traditional RFQ. Now, if there was a strong relationship, this would have a slope to it. But here we have a relatively light slope, and it didn't have much meaning to it. And so we think that there's more potential out there than we originally thought, based on this data, looking at all the varieties across all locations and stuff. It was just encouraging. And so again, here's the vernal spot, and here's your High-Gest 360. But ideally, we want to be out here. We want to be up in here. So in conclusion, there's room for genetic improvement, especially with digestibility and protein. Energy and protein can carry the majority of the value of hay. And digestibility genes have been located in the chromosomes, and we've shown how important they are in the quality of the hay and the tonnage of the hay. And so yield and quality appear not to be as closely linked, and improvement is possible. So our future now is to try to work with the major breeders in the United States to see if we can get these markers into, to confirm these markers, and then work with them to look at it in their populations in the future. And so that's kind of the next step that we're moving towards. And so we're excited about what we found, and we've got a good team pulled together. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
All righty. Well, thanks, Dr. Norberg. And folks, remember, if you've got questions, click on the chat button and type those in the box. We do have one already. Did those European and Asian varieties that you studied in this program, did they originate there, or were they American varieties and then sold to those countries and brought back?
These were original varieties from those areas. And so as far as we know, the ones in China and a few of those, they may have been imported in there from other places, from some time. But originally those people went there and collected them, probably most likely in the native environment.
Okay. Now, this is a question I have. In other crops, we've found that now that they know more about the genome of the crop, they can go back to historical varieties like some of what you're doing and start seeing what is on the genes that we couldn't see phenotypically that have benefits for alfalfa. Is there plans to do that in alfalfa at a future date? Look at some of those historical varieties that maybe we don't grow anymore because we selected them away, but maybe they have something in them for disease resistance or pesticides tolerance or something along those lines?
Well, right now, we're specifically looking at yield quality. We also have some work that I haven't talked about where we looked at protein. So as in a dairy cow, you don't want all the protein to break down in the rumen. You want it to break down later in the digestive system of the cow. And so that's where the Titanins alfalfa that you've heard about, or birchwood trefoil is good for that. And so we're doing some research to see how much difference there are in the breakdown of the protein and trying to find the molecular markers that are associated with that as well. And
Okay.
so, so right now we're concentrating on the main areas. We haven't tried to get into any disease resistance or anything like that quite yet. But it's, we're trying to hit the big things first.
It's fascinating, especially with alfalfa, just how wide of the number of questions there are in regards to alfalfa that you can spend a lifetime researching and finding the answers to, right?
Yeah, well, the good Lord made alfalfa very, in our whole lives is very complex and irreducible complexity. So you've got a lot of lifetimes to look at all this and learn.
We've got another question from the audience. How important is leaf to stem ratio for quality and yield, especially when you're selecting your alfalfa varieties?
Oh, the leaf to stem ratio is very important. And it's one of those things that we considered doing in this experiment, but we taxed our resources as hard as we could. But it's that important that we would have liked to have had it. And I know that even some of the breeding companies use that as a means to their genetics that they're working with.
Okay. We've got another question here. How did the varieties that were designed for high pH and salinity do in this study?
Well, to our knowledge, and again, we're not aware of anything in here that had salt tolerance or anything like that in the materials that we selected. The 50 varieties that came from the 4 companies, S&W, Legacy, Corteva or Alforex. I missed one. Did I say S&W? So anyway, the big 4, they selected the varieties that they wanted to put in there. And I know that we were primarily looking at fiber digestibility, so they gave us a nice range in the fiber digestibility that they knew of.
Okay. When you're talking with farmers, what are their concerns? What do they want alfalfa breeders to answer for them? What's coming up in the pipeline, maybe public and private as well, that excites you and excites farmers as well?
Well, the first thing that we've got to do is, if you look at most of the other crops, you see a yield increase over time of their varieties. And alfalfa, unfortunately, has not been one of those crops that has seen that. And so we've been kind of stagnant. So we're hoping and we're trying to work and find the molecular markers that are actually affecting yield. And so I'm sure that farmers would really appreciate that if we could start making some significant progress on yield. If we can find those genes and then find the best of those genes in there. And so what was the other part of your question?
Well, what excites you about the pipeline that we know of that's coming out? I'm sure you have plenty of connections all over the place, and we've got Alforex that is a sponsor today, and we'll hear more from them next week. But as far as from the public sector, anything that excites you?
Well, I certainly think that these higher digestibility things are really important, and I think that gives us a little more flexibility on our harvest timing, and still make the dairy quality and that kind of thing. And so I know Alforex has done a great job on that. There's also, in the long distance future, the high tannin alfalfa. I think that's going to be real interesting when that comes out. It'll be the next one that really comes out. But they've got to get the tannin concentration just right, so it's not too much and it affects feed intake of the dairy cow, but would create the digestion to go through it better. So, there's a lot of things that are coming down. The salt tolerance alfalfas; those are new things that have come out, and it's good to see that for people that are in those areas. So those are just some of the things that I see coming down the road.
Okay. We've got another question here. Is multi-leaf or total leaf surface more important when you're selecting your alfalfa varieties?
The total leaf is probably more important than just the multi-leaf. The percentage of, like we were talking before, the percentage on a dry weight basis of leaf versus stem. The real difference there is the quality of the leaves are just so much higher than the stems, and that just like the earlier presentation there, we saw how important it was to keep the leaves. And when we start losing those leaves, we lose yield. And so, the weight of the leaves and the quality of those leaves.
This is Dan Undersander. We looked at this quite a few years ago, and we found exactly what Steve suggested, that the important thing was the weight or the mass of the leaves. Some of the multifoliates had a larger number of small leaves, and some of the trifoliates had a greater mass of bigger three-leaflets. So he's exactly right based on the studies that we did years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it, Dr. Undersander. We've got another question here, and I feel kind of like car talk. Like we're finally gonna, solve the answer in somebody's household right now. Is RFV or RFQ a better test for quality and digestibility?
That one's a simple one. RFQ is a better measure for quality. I know that the industry's stuck on RFV, but if we could get to RFQ, that would be a big step forward, because it has the digestibility that we were talking about being so important into it. And so, that's what we really need to move forward to, is something that includes the digestibility in that material, and it's going to help in a good measure of our quality. And, it likes to run higher than RFV anyway, at least in the western part of the United States. So it's nice to have a nicer number, right? Let's get it switched.
All right. Well, Dr. Norberg, it doesn't look like we have any more questions for you today. Thank you so very much for joining us on Alfalfa U on our screens. And here's hoping that next year we get to see you in person.
That sounds good.
Thanks again, sir.
Thank you.
Well, folks, this wraps up our third session of Alfalfa U. You can join us again March 11th, that's next Thursday, for our very special Tailgate Talk. It's a session that we're devoting entirely to our farmer panel, which has been a hallmark of all of our U events since we started these. We're going to bring to your screens a panel of farmers from across the West and High Plains, sharing what works in their alfalfa producing regions, what tools and techniques that they're excited to try, and what challenges they face in raising alfalfa for their domestic and export customers. It is your chance to grab a seat at the tailgate and learn from farmers just like you. We'll also get exclusive looks at new products from our premier sponsors, Alforex Seeds and John Deere. You'll be able to ask their representatives questions about the latest alfalfa varieties and technological advancements that are coming to a field near you. That session begins at 10 a.m. Central Time, March 11th, and registered attendees will get an email reminder and the session link delivered directly to their emails provided at registration. And if you missed any of our previous sessions, the recordings will be posted at hpj.com/alfalfau. Registered attendees will also get an email reminder when all the videos are available, and we've already got the first 2 sessions up for your viewing pleasure. Shortly after this, you'll receive a survey in your email boxes, and if you take a moment and let us know how we're doing and what we could be doing better, that'll help us go a long way towards crafting next year's Alfalfa U programming. Registered attendees will also receive a complimentary 8-week subscription to High Plains Journal. Oh, and before we forget, here's the QR code for your CEU credits. And if you miss it, we'll be able to share it on the recordings as well. If you have any questions regarding your CEU credits, email Kylie Reese, that's KREISS @hpj.com, and she'll be sure to help you. And her information is also in the chat box as well. We want to thank you again for our sponsors for today's session, our premier sponsors, Alforex Seeds and John Deere, and our associate sponsors, STAHELIWEST and Harvest Tech. On behalf of all of us here at High Plains Journal, thanks for riding with us, and we will see you on the trail.
Dirt road in a gooseneck, saddle up with me. Dry land in God's country, crops far as I can see. The headlights on both ends of my day. This country life is for me. Ride with us, HPJ. Ride with us, HPJ.